Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. My daughter Haley had just turned 3 that September, and we were still adjusting to life in this old house outside Stillwater. At 24, raising her alone felt overwhelming most days, especially after her dad disappeared 6 months earlier without even a goodbye text. We'd found this place through a coworker at Dollar General. 2 bedrooms, peeling white paint, sitting at the end of a gravel road about 2 miles from anybody else. The isolation didn't bother me much since the rent was only $400 a month, and there was a decent backyard surrounded by tall prairie grass and scraggly oak trees that creaked against the roof on windy nights. Most evenings followed the same routine. Pick up Haley from my mom's place after work, make something simple for dinner, fight through bath time while she splashed water all over the bathroom floor, then read her exactly 3 stories before she'd finally close her eyes around 8:30. That particular evening in early October started exactly like that. Chicken nuggets shaped like dinosaurs, bubbles everywhere during her bath, and her favorite book about a rabbit who gets lost in the woods. After tucking Haley in with her stuffed elephant named Peanut, I collapsed onto our second-hand couch with some reheated coffee and my phone, grateful for a few minutes of quiet. The house had this way of settling at night, little pops and creaks that I'd gotten used to over the past 4 months of living there. But around 9:15, I heard something different coming from the kitchen. The back door handle was rattling, this metallic clicking sound that didn't match the usual house noises. That door was original to the house, probably from the 60s. Solid wood on the bottom with 9 small glass panes on top, the kind with frosted privacy glass that only showed shapes and shadows. The deadbolt barely caught in the frame anymore, and I kept meaning to ask the landlord to fix it. For maybe 30 seconds, I sat there listening to that handle jiggle, telling myself it had to be the wind. Then everything went quiet for a moment. And that's when I heard them. 3 heavy knocks, slow and deliberate, each one making the glass panes vibrate slightly. Through the doorway to the kitchen, I could see the edge of that door, and a dark shadow moved across those frosted panes, blocking out the dim porch light. The shadow wasn't moving like someone just passing by or a delivery person checking addresses. It lingered there, shifting slightly from side to side like whoever it was kept leaning in to peer through different panes of glass. My first instinct was to call out and ask who was there, but something held me back. Maybe it was the deliberate way those knocks had sounded, or how late it was for anyone to be visiting. I slipped off the couch as quietly as I could, keeping my eyes on that doorway while I grabbed my phone from the coffee table. The kitchen light was off, which meant whoever was outside couldn't see in clearly, but it also meant I'd have to get closer to see anything more than that shadow. I crept toward the kitchen, staying close to the wall, my bare feet silent on the carpet, and then the cold linoleum. When I reached the door frame, I pressed myself against it and slowly leaned around to get a better view. The shadow had moved to the far left pane now, and I could make out what looked like hands cupped around someone's face, trying to see inside. That's when the handle started turning. Not rattling anymore, actually turning, slowly, testing whether the door was locked. The deadbolt held, but I could hear it straining against the frame, that old wood creaking under pressure. I pulled back from the doorway and held my breath, thumb hovering over my phone's emergency call button. The turning stopped, followed by silence that stretched for maybe 10 seconds. Then came a different sound, scratching, like metal on wood, coming from lower on the door near the handle. Whoever was out there wasn't knocking anymore. They were working at something, and the systematic nature of those sounds made my chest tighten. I thought about Haley sleeping in her room just down the hall, completely unaware, clutching Peanut with her mouth slightly open the way she always slept. The scratching continued for another minute before stopping abruptly, and the shadow disappeared from the glass panes. But I didn't hear footsteps walking away on the wooden porch or crunching on the gravel path that led to our driveway. I stayed frozen against that wall for what must have been 5 minutes just listening. The refrigerator hummed its usual tune. The oak tree outside scraped against the roof, but nothing from the back porch. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe it was someone drunk who got the wrong house, or teenagers playing a prank, though we lived too far out for random pranks. Then I remembered something that made my mouth go dry. The previous tenant, an older woman named Dolores, according to my landlord, had moved out suddenly after living here for years. He'd been vague about why, just said she needed to be closer to family. I'd found some of her mail still coming to the house, even some prescription bottles in the medicine cabinet that I'd thrown away. What if someone was looking for her, someone who didn't know she'd moved? Or worse, what if they did know and thought a young woman living alone would be an easier target? A soft thud from the side of the house snapped me back to the present. My bedroom window faced that direction, and it was cracked open about 2 inches to let in the cool night air. I backed away from the kitchen doorway and hurried down the hall, still trying to stay quiet. Phone clutched in my hand with 911 already typed but not called. I reached my bedroom door and slowly pushed it open, peering into the darkness. The window screen was moving slightly, pushed inward like something had pressed against it from outside. Through the gap under the raised window, I could hear breathing, slow, controlled breaths that definitely weren't wind. Someone was standing right outside my bedroom window, probably on the old wooden crate I'd left there from when I'd been trying to fix the gutter. The breathing continued, steady and patient, and then I heard fingers running along the screen, testing its edges, looking for a way to pop it out of the frame. Every instinct screamed at me to grab Haley and run. But run where? My car keys were on the kitchen counter right by that back door where this had all started. The front door was in the living room, but it led out to the same gravel driveway where this person could easily see us. I pressed call on my phone, turning the volume down as low as possible while the dispatcher answered. Whispering as quietly as I could, I gave our address, 4782 County Road 51, and explained someone was trying to break in. The dispatcher, a woman with a calm voice, told me deputies were on their way, but it would be at least 15 minutes given our location. 15 minutes. The fingers stopped moving along the screen and I heard the wooden crate creak as weight shifted on it. Then came a sound that nearly made me scream, the window itself being pushed up, slow and careful. I'd forgotten to lock it after opening it earlier, and now it was sliding up inch by inch, the old wood frame groaning softly. I backed out of the bedroom and rushed to Haley's room, scooping her up as gently as I could while she stayed deep in sleep. She mumbled something about pancakes but didn't wake up, her small body warm and limp in my arms. Carrying her and Peanut, I went to the bathroom, the only room in the house with a lock on the door, even if it was just a flimsy push-button one. I locked us in and sat on the closed toilet lid with Haley in my lap, rocking her slightly to keep her asleep while listening to every sound in the house. The dispatcher stayed on the line, asking for updates in a hushed voice that I could barely hear. From the bathroom, I heard my bedroom window slide the rest of the way open, then nothing for about 30 seconds. After that came the unmistakable sound of feet hitting my bedroom floor, 2 soft thuds as someone climbed inside. The footsteps were careful but not silent, work boots maybe, moving across my bedroom toward the hallway. They paused at my doorway, and I held Haley tighter, praying she wouldn't wake up and make any noise. The footsteps moved down the hall toward the kitchen, and I heard drawers being opened. Not ransacked, but searched through methodically. The silverware drawer rattled, then the junk drawer where I kept batteries and random screws. Cabinet doors opened and closed with careful precision. This wasn't some desperate burglar grabbing valuables. This person was looking for something specific. The dispatcher whispered that deputies were 8 minutes out, and I whispered back what was happening. She told me to stay where I was, keep the door locked, don't engage. Like I had any intention of confronting whoever this was while holding my 3-year-old. The searching sounds moved to the living room. I could hear the coffee table being moved, couch cushions being lifted. Then the footsteps came back down the hall, slower this time, and stopped right outside the bathroom door. The doorknob turned slightly, testing it, and found it locked. There was a long pause, maybe 20 seconds of absolute silence except for my heart pounding so hard, I was sure they could hear it through the door. Then came a voice, male, gravelly like someone who'd smoked for decades. "Dolores, I know you're in there. Just give me back what you took and I'll leave. Nobody needs to get hurt." The wrong name, the wrong person, but the threat was clear enough. I stayed silent, holding Haley against my chest, her breath warm on my neck. The dispatcher was saying something, but I couldn't focus on her words. The man spoke again, louder. "Don't make this difficult. You've had 6 months to think about it. That money belongs to me, not you." He rattled the doorknob harder, and I heard him lean against the door, testing its strength. The bathroom door was hollow core, the kind you could probably punch through if you really wanted to. "I saw your car. I know you're home. And I know you've got someone in there with you. I heard you talking." My throat constricted as I realized he meant the dispatcher. He thought I was Dolores, hiding in here with someone else, and nothing I could say would probably convince him otherwise without revealing that a young mother and toddler were actually behind this flimsy door. The doorknob rattled violently now, and I heard him throw his shoulder against the door. The frame shook, and I saw the lock button wiggle. Haley stirred in my arms, making a small whimpering sound, and I quickly started humming softly in her ear, the same tune I used when she had nightmares. The man must have heard something because he stopped. "You got a kid in there, Dolores? That's low, even for you. Using a kid as a shield." His voice had changed, uncertain now, maybe even confused. The dispatcher was saying the deputies were 3 minutes out, but 3 minutes felt like a lifetime. Outside the bathroom, I heard him pace a few steps, muttering something I couldn't make out. Then his footsteps moved quickly down the hall toward my bedroom, the window he'd come through. I heard him climbing back out, the wooden crate scraping against the house siding, and then feet hitting the ground outside. Still holding the phone, I whispered to the dispatcher that he was leaving through the bedroom window. "She told me to stay put until deputies arrived. Don't leave the bathroom no matter what." 2 minutes later, I heard sirens in the distance, growing louder as they turned onto our gravel road. The dispatcher confirmed they were pulling up to the house, and only then did I finally breathe properly. Haley woke up when the deputies knocked on the front door, confused and cranky, asking why we were in the bathroom. I carried her out, legs shaking so badly I could barely walk, and let the officers in. They searched the entire property with flashlights while one deputy, a young guy named Officer Brennan, took my statement. When they checked the back door, they found deep pry marks all around the deadbolt and frame. He'd been working at it with some kind of tool before moving to the window. On my bedroom floor, they found muddy boot prints and, strangest of all, an old photograph that must have fallen from his pocket. It showed Dolores, recognizable from the mail I'd seen, standing next to a man who looked like he could have been her son or nephew. Officer Brennan bagged it as evidence and said they'd try to track down Dolores to figure out what this was about. They stayed until dawn, and I spent the rest of that night packing our things. We moved in with my mom the next day, and I never went back except to get the rest of our stuff with my brother and cousin present. The landlord said he understood and didn't charge me for breaking the lease. I found out later from Officer Brennan that they'd located Dolores in Arkansas. She'd apparently been taking care of her adult son with mental health issues, who'd been stealing from people to feed a gambling addiction. She'd taken his stash of stolen cash when she left, trying to return it to victims, but he'd tracked her down to the wrong place. They arrested him 2 weeks later at a motel near Tulsa. I still check every lock twice before bed, and Haley, now 5, doesn't understand why Mommy doesn't like it when people knock on doors after dark. The farmhouse sat 40 miles outside Billings, surrounded by wheat fields that rippled like water whenever the wind blew hard enough. My parents had moved to Phoenix for Dad's arthritis, but kept the property as a rental, and since it was between tenants that June, they offered it to me while I worked on my senior thesis. Montana State felt a million miles away out there, which was exactly what I needed after 3 years of dorm life and lecture halls. The isolation wrapped around me like a blanket those first few weeks. Just the creaking bones of that old house, the whisper of wheat stalks, and old Mr. Garrison's pickup truck rattling past once a day on the gravel road. 12 acres of nothing but peace, with the nearest real neighbor a half-mile away. My laptop and a stack of research books took over the kitchen table, and I fell into a routine that felt almost meditative. My old bedroom on the second floor faced the backyard, where this massive oak tree threw shadows across the walls at night, like long fingers reaching for something. The house had been built in the 50s, all hardwood floors that announced every step, and windows that rattled in their frames when storms rolled through. For 2 weeks, the days blurred together beautifully. Coffee from Mom's ancient percolator at 8, research and writing until my eyes burned, then frozen dinners while trying to stream something on internet that barely functioned. By 11 each night, I'd crawl into bed feeling accomplished and exhausted in the best way. But around the 3rd week of June, sleep started breaking apart. I'd snap awake at 2, sometimes 3 in the morning, heart pounding like I'd been running, skin prickling with this electric feeling that made every shadow in the room seem important somehow. At first, I blamed the coffee, then the stress of my thesis deadline creeping closer. Maybe it was just the house settling in new ways, or coyotes passing through the property. Dad had mentioned they sometimes came close to the house hunting for mice in the barn. But the feeling kept getting stronger, more specific. It wasn't just waking up anxious, it was waking up feeling observed, like when you sense someone reading over your shoulder at the library. The sensation always centered on my bedroom window, the one facing the backyard. During the day, that window was my favorite feature of the room, letting in morning light that made everything golden. But at night, with nothing but darkness pressing against the glass, it became something else entirely. I started leaving the curtains closed, telling myself it was to block the morning sun, not because of how exposed that rectangle of black glass made me feel. The 4th week brought a heat wave that turned the farmhouse into an oven. Even with every window open and 2 box fans running, the upstairs felt unbearable. On Wednesday night, I remember it was Wednesday because I'd driven to town that afternoon for groceries, I gave up trying to sleep around 1:30. My sheets were soaked with sweat, and that familiar prickle of anxiety was already crawling up my spine. I sat up, debating whether to grab my pillow and try sleeping on the couch downstairs, when I heard something that made me go completely still. Outside, maybe 20 feet from the house, came the distinct sound of a throat clearing. Not a cough exactly, but that deliberate noise someone makes when they want you to know they're there. The sound was so casual, so human, that for a second I thought maybe Mr. Garrison had come by, though I couldn't imagine why he'd be in my backyard at this hour. I crept to the window, staying low, and peeked through the gap where the curtain didn't quite meet the wall. The moon was nearly full that night, casting everything in this silver-blue light that made the yard look like an old photograph. The oak tree's shadow stretched across the grass, and beyond that the wheat field began, stalks barely moving in the still air. Nothing seemed wrong at first glance. Then I saw him. A man stood at the edge of the property line, where the mowed grass met the wheat. He was facing my window, completely motionless, arms hanging loose at his sides. Even from the second floor I could tell he was tall, maybe 6'3" or 6'4", wearing what looked like work clothes, jeans and a light-colored shirt. His face was just a pale oval in the moonlight, but somehow I knew he was looking directly at me, even though I was hidden behind the curtain. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 seconds, me crouched by the window, him standing in my yard like he'd grown roots. Then he took a step forward. Just one step, slow and deliberate, like he was testing something. My whole body locked up, this primal fear flooding through me that made thinking impossible. He took another step, then another, moving toward the house with this strange measured pace, like someone walking through water. When he reached the oak tree about 15 feet from the house, he stopped. His head tilted back slightly, and I realized he was looking up at my window more directly now. That's when I noticed the cigarette. The orange glow appeared suddenly as he took a drag, illuminating his face for just a second. I couldn't make out features clearly, but I saw enough. Hollow cheeks, deep-set eyes, and something wrong with his mouth, like he was smiling but only with one side of his face. He stood there smoking, never moving except to raise and lower the cigarette, keeping his eyes fixed on my window the entire time. My phone was on the nightstand, just 5 feet away, but moving meant risking him seeing me. I tried to control my breathing, these shallow little gasps that made my chest ache, while my mind raced through options. Call 911, run downstairs and lock myself in the bathroom, get to my car keys in the kitchen. Every plan seemed to end with me having to move, to reveal that I was awake and watching him. The cigarette glowed brighter as he took a long drag, and then he did something that made bile rise in my throat. He waved. Not a friendly wave, but this slow, deliberate movement of his hand, back and forth like he was cleaning a window. The gesture was so wrong, so out of place in the middle of the night, that I actually gasped out loud. His head snapped toward the sound immediately, that lopsided smile stretching wider. He knew exactly where I was. He'd known the whole time. The spell broke and I scrambled backward, grabbing my phone and punching in 911 with fingers that wouldn't work right. The dispatcher's voice sounded impossibly calm as I whispered that someone was in my yard, that I needed help now, please. He's just standing there watching me. She kept asking questions. Was I safe? Was the house locked? Could I describe the person? While I crawled to the hallway, staying below the window line. Through the thin walls, I heard something that made my situation so much worse. Footsteps on the wooden porch below, slow and heavy, testing each board like he was savoring the sound. The doorknob to the back door rattled once, twice, then stopped. I heard him walking around the house, pausing at each window, and I realized with sick certainty that I hadn't checked any of the locks before going to bed. The dispatcher was saying units were on their way, 15 minutes out, but 15 minutes felt like a lifetime when I could hear him trying the front door now, the knob turning easily in his hand. The door didn't open though. By pure luck, I'd thrown the deadbolt after bringing in groceries that afternoon, something I rarely remembered to do. The doorknob stopped rattling, followed by silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Then came a sound that turned my insides to water, the scrape of metal on metal. He was working on the lock, and from the purposeful rhythm of the sounds, he knew what he was doing. I pressed myself against the hallway wall, whispering to the dispatcher that he was trying to break in, that I needed to hide. She stayed on the line as I crept to my parents' bedroom, the only room with a lock on the door, my bare feet silent on the old floorboards I'd learned to navigate in darkness as a kid. Just as I reached for the doorknob, I heard the distinctive click of the deadbolt turning. The front door creaked open slowly, and heavy footsteps entered my house. He wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. The footsteps moved through the living room with confidence, pausing occasionally like he was examining things. I heard drawers opening in the kitchen, the refrigerator door, then the squeak of the stairs as he began climbing to the second floor. Each step was deliberate, taking his time, and between the footfalls I could hear him breathing, this raspy, excited sound like he'd been running. The dispatcher kept telling me to stay calm, to lock the door, help was coming, but her voice felt distant and useless. The footsteps reached the landing and turned toward my bedroom first. Through the thin door I heard him enter my room, the bed creaking as he sat down, then stood again. He was looking for me, checking the closet, even looking under the bed from the sounds of it. Then his footsteps moved back to the hallway, and I watched the strip of light under the door as his shadow passed by, heading to the bathroom, then the guest room, systematically checking each space. Finally, his shadow stopped directly in front of my parents' bedroom door. The doorknob turned slowly, meeting the resistance of the lock. Silence for a moment, then a soft laugh, not quite normal, more like air being forced through clenched teeth. He knocked, 3 gentle taps like he was visiting a friend. "I saw you watching me," he said, and his voice was worse than I'd imagined, smooth and conversational, with this underlying wheeze like damaged lungs. "That's rude, you know, watching people." Another knock, harder this time. The dispatcher was practically shouting in my ear that units were 2 minutes out, but I couldn't respond, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stare at that door handle as it jiggled violently. Then everything went quiet again. His shadow moved away from the door and I heard him walk back toward the stairs, but he didn't go down. Instead, he sat on the top step. I knew that particular creak from years of sneaking in after curfew. He was waiting, and somehow that was worse than if he'd kept trying to get in. Sirens finally pierced the night, growing louder as they turned onto the gravel road. The man stood immediately, taking the stairs 3 at a time from the sound of it, his boots thundering through the house. The back door slammed so hard that something fell in the kitchen and shattered. Through the bedroom window, I saw him sprint across the yard, that tall figure moving with surprising speed toward the wheat field. He paused at the property line, turning back to look at the house one more time, as red and blue lights flooded the driveway. Then he disappeared into the wheat, the stalk swallowing him like he'd never existed at all. The police found me 20 minutes later, still locked in that bedroom, still clutching the phone. They searched for hours with dogs and flashlights, but all they found were boot prints in the dirt and 5 cigarette butts arranged in a perfect line beneath my bedroom window, like he'd been there multiple nights, watching, waiting for the right moment. I left that same morning, threw everything in my car while the cops were still processing the scene, stayed with a friend in Bozeman for the rest of the summer and never went back to that farmhouse alone. The police never caught him. They increased patrols in the area for a few weeks, told me he was probably some drifter who'd moved on, but I knew better. 2 months later, my parents sold the property to a developer who turned it into 3 suburban lots. The new houses have security systems, motion lights, cameras, all the things that might have helped me sleep that night. Sometimes I Google the address, looking at the street view of those modern homes where our farmhouse used to stand. The oak tree is gone too, cleared for a swimming pool. But I know if I drove out there at night, if I stood where my bedroom window used to be, I'd still feel him watching from somewhere in the darkness, patient as a spider, waiting for another window, another person to notice him standing in their yard. I just finished grading spelling tests that Thursday afternoon when I first heard the crying. Spring of 2018 in our little Texas town meant wildflowers everywhere and neighbors firing up their grills every weekend. I was living in my grandmother's old house on Willow Creek Drive, a street where mailboxes still had those little red flags, and people actually used them. Teaching 4th grade kept me busy during the week, and at 32, I'd settled into a comfortable rhythm of lesson plans and weekend gardening. The house had been mine for 5 years by then, a 2-bedroom place with creaky floors and a kitchen window that looked directly into the backyard next door. My days followed a predictable pattern. School until 3:30, home to water the tomatoes, maybe a glass of wine on the porch while watching the neighborhood kids race their bikes before dinner. That particular April had been unseasonably warm, the kind of heat that made the asphalt shimmer by noon. Everything about my life felt steady and safe, wrapped in the familiar sounds of lawn mowers and screen doors slamming. The Thompsons had lived next door for as long as anyone could remember, but after old Mr. Thompson passed away from a heart attack, his son Bradley moved in alone. Bradley was 40-something, worked at the hardware store downtown, and kept to himself mostly. He'd wave when he saw you but never stopped to chat like his father used to. The man had this peculiar habit of wearing long-sleeved flannel shirts even when the temperature hit 90 degrees, and his truck always had mud on it despite the fact we hadn't had rain in weeks. He'd installed one of those tall privacy fences between our properties about 6 months after moving in, saying something about wanting to keep his German Shepherd from bothering anyone. Thing is, I never once saw or heard that dog. What really struck me as odd was how he'd completely renovated the old garden shed in his backyard. I could hear power tools running for weeks, sometimes until 2 in the morning. When I asked him about it once while getting my mail, he just said he was turning it into a workshop for woodworking projects, then quickly went inside his house before I could respond. It was a Thursday evening, around 6 o'clock, when I first heard something that made me stop washing dishes and listen. Through my kitchen window, I could see Bradley's shed clearly, painted dark green with a small window covered by what looked like black plastic from the inside. The sound was faint, almost like a wounded animal, but there was something distinctly human about it. I turned off the faucet and stood there, soapy hands dripping, straining to hear better. The crying, because that's what it was, I realized, came in short bursts, muffled and desperate. My first thought was maybe Bradley had hurt himself working with his tools, but his truck wasn't even in the driveway. The sound stopped after a minute or so, and I convinced myself it must have been a cat. We had plenty of strays in the neighborhood, and they could make ungodly noises when they fought or got stuck somewhere. Still, something about the rhythm of those cries stuck with me. I dried my hands and went out to my backyard, pretending to check on my tomato plants while really trying to get a better angle on that shed. The next few days, I found myself listening more carefully whenever I was home. Friday passed without incident, but on Saturday morning, while I was spreading mulch in my flower beds, I heard it again. This time it was louder, more distinct, definitely human, definitely distressed. The shed was maybe 30 feet from where I knelt in the dirt, and those sounds were coming from inside it. Bradley's truck was in the driveway this time, and I could see him through his kitchen window, calmly making breakfast like nothing was wrong. The crying turned into what sounded like someone trying to speak through a gag or covering, words I couldn't make out, but desperate in tone. My mouth went completely dry, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. When Bradley suddenly looked up from his stove and stared straight at me through his window, I quickly looked away and focused on my gardening. But my mind was racing. Who keeps someone in a shed? The thought seemed insane, like something from a crime show, not something that happens in real life. Yet those sounds, I spent the rest of the day trying to come up with logical explanations while that sick feeling in my gut grew stronger. Sunday came with thunderstorms, the kind that knock out power and flood the streets within minutes. I figured the rain would mask any sounds from next door, but around midnight, a lightning flash lit up my bedroom and I saw Bradley out there in the downpour, carrying something wrapped in a tarp toward his shed. He moved quickly despite the mud, and the way he kept checking around made my chest tighten with anxiety. I pressed myself against my bedroom wall, peering through the edge of my curtain as he unlocked what looked like 3 different padlocks on the shed door. The whole thing took maybe 2 minutes, but watching him struggle with whatever was in that tarp, something heavy by the way he had to readjust his grip twice, made me realize this wasn't normal workshop behavior. After he went back inside his house, I sat on my bed for hours, listening to the rain and trying to talk myself out of what I was thinking. But then, between thunder rolls, I heard it again, louder this time, more desperate. Someone was screaming behind that shed door, screaming words I could barely make out. Please, and what sounded like home. My whole body turned cold, and I knew right then I wasn't imagining this. Monday morning, I called in sick to work, something I never did unless I was genuinely ill. But I couldn't leave, not when every instinct told me someone needed help next door. I positioned myself at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a clear view of Bradley's backyard, pretending to grade papers while really watching that shed. Around 10, after Bradley left for work, I did something that still makes me feel guilty and brave at the same time. I walked over to his fence and tried to peek through the gaps between the boards. The shed had no windows on the side facing my yard, just that one covered window facing Bradley's house. I could hear movement inside, shuffling sounds and what might have been chains dragging across wood. Then, clear as day, I heard a young voice, couldn't tell if it was male or female, saying, "Is someone there? Help me. Please help me." My knees nearly buckled. This was real. This was happening. and someone was being held prisoner 15 feet from where I ate breakfast every morning. I backed away from the fence, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst, and ran inside to grab my phone. The 911 call was probably the most difficult phone conversation I've ever had. How do you explain that you think your neighbor is keeping someone locked in a shed without sounding like a paranoid lunatic? The dispatcher, a woman with a steady voice, kept asking me to slow down and repeat myself. I told her about the crying, the screaming, the voice begging for help just minutes ago. She asked if I could see anyone in immediate danger, and I had to admit I couldn't actually see inside the shed. There was a long pause before she said she'd send an officer to do a welfare check. 20 minutes later, a single patrol car pulled up. No sirens, no urgency, just Officer Garrett, a young cop who looked barely out of the academy. He listened to my story with a skeptical expression, took some notes, then walked over to Bradley's house and knocked. No answer, of course, since Bradley was at work. Garrett walked around the property from the sidewalk, shone his flashlight at the shed from a distance, then came back to tell me there was no probable cause to enter private property. He suggested I call back if I heard anything else concerning and gave me his card. I watched him drive away, feeling completely helpless and frustrated. That afternoon, I did something I'm not proud of but felt was necessary. I called Bradley's work and pretended to be interested in buying lumber, asking specifically when Bradley would be available to help me. They said he was there until 5. That gave me about 3 hours. I grabbed the biggest hammer from my garage and walked straight to his backyard. To hell with trespassing laws when someone's life might be at stake. The shed door had 3 heavy-duty padlocks, just as I'd seen, but the window on the side was my target. I smashed through the black plastic and glass with one swing, then used the hammer's claw to tear away the boards Bradley had nailed over it from the inside. The smell that hit me was awful. Human waste, sweat, and something rotten like old food. When my eyes adjusted to the darkness inside, I saw her, a girl, maybe 16 or 17, chained to a metal post Bradley had installed in the concrete floor. She was wearing a dirty t-shirt and shorts, her hair matted, her eyes wide with terror and hope. She tried to speak but only managed a hoarse whisper, "Water, please." I told her I was getting her out right now, then called 911 again, this time screaming at them to send everyone, send them now. There's a kidnapped girl in the shed at 427 Willow Creek Drive. Everything happened fast after that. I stayed with the girl, talking to her through the window while sirens grew louder in the distance. Her name was Ashley, and she'd run away from a foster home in Oklahoma 3 weeks ago. Bradley had offered her a ride at a truck stop, said he knew a place she could stay for a few nights, get a meal and figure things out. She'd been in that shed for 18 days. 18 days of him bringing her water and gas station food twice a day, telling her that nobody was looking for her, that foster kids disappeared all the time and no one cared. She showed me the bucket in the corner, the thin mattress on the floor, the notebook where she'd been scratching marks to count the days. When the police arrived, 3 cars, then 5, then the whole street was flashing red and blue. They had to use bolt cutters on the chains. The EMTs wrapped Ashley in one of those silver emergency blankets, and she grabbed my hand before they put her in the ambulance, squeezing it so tight I could feel every bone. "You saved my life," she whispered, and I just nodded because I couldn't speak through the tears. The image of her being wheeled away on that stretcher, finally safe, is something I'll never forget. Bradley arrived home from work right as they were putting up crime scene tape around his property. I'll never forget the look on his face when he saw the police cars, the ambulance, the shed door hanging open with investigators taking photographs inside. He didn't run or fight. He just stood there by his truck, shoulders sagging like he knew it was over. They arrested him right there on his driveway while half the neighborhood watched from their yards. As they put him in the patrol car, he looked straight at me and his expression wasn't angry or threatening. It was almost relieved, like he was tired of carrying the weight of what he'd done. The detective told me later that Bradley confessed to everything during questioning. He'd been planning it for months, specifically targeting runaways because he thought no one would miss them. The soundproofing he'd installed wasn't perfect, but it would have been good enough if I hadn't been paying attention. They found receipts for the materials, internet searches about missing teenagers, even a journal where he'd written about his plans. The shed had been designed as a prison from the start. The concrete floor poured specially to hold that metal post, ventilation holes drilled to keep someone alive but not comfortable, the door reinforced from the inside. The investigation revealed that Ashley wasn't supposed to be his first victim. Police found evidence that Bradley had been watching and documenting patterns of other runaways at various truck stops across Texas for over a year. He had photographs, license plates of people who gave them rides, notes about which days had the most vulnerable kids passing through. Ashley just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time when Bradley felt ready to execute his plan. What haunts me most is that he told investigators he chose our neighborhood specifically because it was quiet, full of people who minded their own business, and his father's reputation would protect him from suspicion. He was right about almost everything, except he didn't count on me being a teacher, trained to notice when something's wrong with a young person, even when I couldn't see them. The prosecutors said my 911 calls, especially the second one, saved Ashley's life. Bradley had been growing frustrated with her resistance, and his journal entries from those final days suggested he was considering ending the situation soon. Those were his actual words, like she was a problem to solve instead of a human being. Ashley recovered physically within a few months, though I know the emotional scars will last much longer. She sent me a letter 6 months later from her new placement, a group home in Colorado that specializes in helping trafficked and abused teens. She said she was learning to trust again, taking online classes to catch up on school, and had adopted a rescue cat named Warrior. We still exchange Christmas cards, and last year she sent me a photo from her high school graduation. Bradley got 40 years in federal prison for kidnapping and false imprisonment, though he'll be eligible for parole in 25. I moved out of that house 2 months after it happened, not because I was scared, but because I couldn't stop staring at that empty shed, couldn't stop wondering what would have happened if I'd called the police after the very first time I heard crying. The new owners tore it down immediately, planted a garden where it used to stand. Sometimes I drive by the old neighborhood, and it looks exactly the same as before, peaceful and quiet. But I know better now. I pay attention to things others might dismiss, trust my instincts when something doesn't feel right, and I'll never again assume that terrible things can't happen just because the street looks safe and the neighbors wave hello. There's a particular kind of silence that settles over small Nebraska neighborhoods at night, the kind where you can hear a dog barking 3 blocks away, or a garage door opening down the street. I'd been living in this house about 20 minutes outside Lincoln for 8 months, working from home as a freelance graphic designer, spending my days in the front office watching the predictable rhythm of suburban life through my window. The mailman at noon, kids getting off the school bus at 3:30, sprinklers turning on at dusk. Everything had its schedule, its pattern, its comfortable predictability. The house next door belonged to Walter Hutchinson, a man probably in his late 60s who existed more as a ghost than an actual neighbor. During my entire time living there, I'd spotted him maybe 3 times total. Always at dawn when he'd shuffle out to check his mail wearing this faded blue windbreaker with reflective strips that caught the streetlight just before sunrise. He moved like someone who didn't want to be noticed, quick and purposeful, never making eye contact or acknowledging anyone's existence. It was mid-February when I first noticed Walter's basement light clicking on in the middle of the night. My bedroom window faced his house, and around 2 or 3 a.m. this harsh fluorescent glow would suddenly flood through my blinds, bright enough to wake me from deep sleep. Initially, I didn't think much of it. Insomnia hits everyone differently, and maybe the old guy liked to tinker with projects when he couldn't sleep. But after a couple of weeks, something started bothering me about the whole situation. Walter's beat-up Ford truck hadn't moved from his driveway in what seemed like forever. Dead leaves had accumulated in thick drifts around the tires, and the windshield was covered in that yellowish-green pollen that comes with early spring. His lawn had transformed into a jungle, the grass reaching almost knee-height, full of dandelions and wild growth that would have driven any self-respecting homeowner crazy. The mailbox was stuffed to capacity, with catalogs and envelopes scattered on the ground beneath it, like nobody had touched them in weeks. What really got under my skin was the randomness of it all. Some nights the light would stay on for 4, maybe 5 hours straight, and I'd drift in and out of sleep with that glow bleeding through my window. Other nights, it would flicker on for just 10 or 15 minutes before plunging back into darkness. I started keeping a notebook by my bed, jotting down the times just to see if there was any logic to it. 2:47 a.m. on Monday, 3:15 a.m. on Tuesday, nothing Wednesday, then 1:23 a.m. on Friday. No pattern whatsoever. The strangest part was that I never saw any other lights in the house. Not the kitchen, not the living room, not even the porch light when he'd supposedly be going down to the basement. Just that single rectangular window glowing like some kind of beacon in the night, casting long shadows across his overgrown yard. By the third week of this, I couldn't ignore how wrong everything felt. Walter's house looked abandoned in every way except for that basement light. Spiderwebs had formed across his front door, thick and undisturbed. A package from Amazon had been sitting on his porch for at least 10 days. The cardboard warped from rain and sun. Even his garbage bins hadn't been moved to the curb in over a month. I knew because I'd been paying attention, watching from my office window during the day, trying to catch any sign of life. The neighbors on the other side, the Johnsons, mentioned they hadn't seen Walter either when I casually brought it up while getting my mail, but nobody seemed particularly concerned. "He's always been odd," Mrs. Johnson said, shrugging like this was just Walter being Walter. "Keeps to himself, you know how some people are." That Friday night I decided I'd had enough of the mystery. The light had been on since midnight, and by 2 a.m. I was wide awake, staring at that glowing window from my bedroom. I threw on a hoodie and my old sneakers, the ones that didn't squeak, and stepped out into the cold February air. The neighborhood was dead quiet, except for the distant hum of the interstate a few miles away. Walter's yard felt like stepping into a different world. The grass was so tall it soaked my jeans up to the knees with dew, and I had to push through it like I was wading through water. The closer I got to his house, the louder my heartbeat seemed, thundering in my ears. I wasn't planning anything illegal, I told myself. Just wanted to peek through the basement window, maybe see what was causing that light. The window sat at ground level, one of those narrow rectangular ones that most basements have, and it was cracked open about an inch, letting out a thin line of bright white light and the faint sound of something I couldn't quite identify. Maybe a fan or some kind of machinery. I crouched down next to the window, my knees sinking into the wet earth, and tried to angle myself to see inside without being too obvious. The glass was dirty, covered in spots of mud and dust, but through the grime I could make out part of the basement. What I saw made my whole body go rigid. The walls were covered, absolutely covered, in photographs. Not family photos or artistic shots, but what looked like surveillance photos. People walking, sitting in cars, entering buildings, all taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. They were pinned up with red thumbtacks in neat rows, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Some had writing underneath in black marker that I couldn't read from my angle, but what made my throat close up was recognizing some of the faces. There was Janet from the coffee shop downtown, the one who always remembered my order. There was Mr. Castellano, who taught at the local high school. There was even a photo of the teenage kid who delivered newspapers on Sunday mornings. My legs were trembling as I shifted position to get a better view, and that's when I saw the far wall, the one with the larger prints. These weren't just random surveillance shots. These were photos of people who'd been in the news recently, their faces familiar from missing person posters I'd seen around town. And on social media, Amanda Reeves, the college student who'd vanished from the university campus 3 months ago. Douglas Harper, the accountant whose car was found abandoned by the river in January. Sophia Mendez, the nurse who never showed up for her shift at the medical center and hadn't been seen since. Their photos were arranged in a timeline, with dates written underneath, some dating back years. Below each missing person's photo was a series of other shots, them at grocery stores, walking their dogs, sitting in their cars at red lights. The level of documentation was insane, like Walter had been tracking these people for weeks or months before they disappeared. In the corner of the basement, I could see what looked like file boxes, dozens of them, labeled with years going back to at least 2010. The sound of a door creaking from inside the house sent a jolt of pure panic through me. I dropped flat against the wet ground, my cheek pressed into the mud, not daring to breathe. Through the thin crack of the window, I could hear footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving across the basement floor. Then a voice, Walter's voice, but different from the few times I'd heard him speak before. He was talking to someone, his tone conversational, almost cheerful. "You're being so quiet tonight," he said. And there was something deeply wrong about the way he said it, like he was talking to a child or a pet. "That's okay. We have plenty of time. No one even knows you're here." The footsteps moved closer to the window, and I could see a shadow pass by. I pressed myself flatter against the ground, praying the tall grass would hide me. My phone was in my pocket, and I slowly reached for it, trying not to make any movement that might catch his attention through that cracked window. Just as my fingers wrapped around my phone, Walter's footsteps stopped directly above me, on the other side of the window. I could hear his breathing, raspy and uneven, like he'd been smoking for decades. "Did you hear that?" he said to whoever was in there with him. "Sounds like we might have a visitor." My entire body locked up, muscles so tense they hurt. Through the tiny gap, I could see his feet in worn brown slippers standing maybe 2 feet from the window. He stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 seconds, then walked away, his voice getting fainter. No, probably just a raccoon. They've been getting into everything since nobody's been cutting this grass." I waited until I couldn't hear him anymore, then slowly, painfully slowly, started crawling backward through the grass. Every movement felt like it took forever, every rustle of the grass sounding like an explosion in the quiet night. I made it back to the property line, then to my yard, my clothes soaked and covered in mud. Once inside my house, I locked every door, checked every window, and called 911 with shaking fingers. The dispatcher sounded skeptical at first. A concerned neighbor reporting suspicious activity isn't exactly high priority. But when I mentioned the missing person's photos, Amanda Reeves specifically, her tone changed completely. "Officers are on their way. Stay in your home and keep your doors locked." Within 15 minutes, the street was flooded with police cars. No sirens, but lights flashing, reflecting off every house on the block. I watched from my window as they surrounded Walter's house, and then heard them through a megaphone asking him to come out. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then they broke down the door. The shouting that followed was intense but brief, and I saw them bring Walter out in handcuffs, his blue windbreaker still on, his face completely calm like he'd been expecting this. He looked directly at my window as they put him in the patrol car, and the expression on his face wasn't anger. It was disappointment, like I'd ruined something he'd been working on for a very long time. The next few hours were a blur of police interviews and evidence collection. They found Amanda Reeves in a soundproofed room Walter had built in a corner of the basement, behind a false wall. She was alive, dehydrated and traumatized, but alive, and had been there for 6 days. The other missing people weren't as fortunate. The police found remains buried in various locations throughout the county, based on detailed maps Walter had kept in those file boxes. Turned out he'd been doing this for 13 years, selecting people who fit specific criteria he'd written out in notebooks they recovered. He worked as a night security guard at a warehouse for decades before retiring, a job that taught him about surveillance, about watching, about patience. The photos on his wall represented years of stalking, and the police counted at least 47 victims, though they suspected there were more. Walter had been using his basement as what investigators called a collection point, keeping victims there, before moving them to secondary locations. They never let me see the full extent of what they found in that house, but the detective who interviewed me said I'd saved Amanda's life and potentially prevented more disappearances. Walter Hutchinson pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty and got multiple life sentences without parole. The house next door was eventually demolished after sitting empty for a year, and now there's just an empty lot there that nobody wants to build on. Sometimes at night, I still wake up around 2 or 3 a.m., and I find myself looking out the window at where that basement window used to be. The neighborhood returned to its quiet routine. Mailman at noon, kids off the bus at 3:30, sprinklers at dusk. But I can't forget Walter's voice that night, talking to Amanda in the basement, or the way he looked at me as they drove him away. I've thought about moving, but somehow staying feels like bearing witness to what happened here, making sure people remember. Because the scariest part wasn't discovering what Walter was doing. It was realizing he'd been doing it for over a decade, while we all lived our normal lives right next door, never suspecting that our boring, quiet neighborhood was hiding something so evil. The Ford Ranger's engine knocked like it always did when I pushed past 50, reminding me why Frank kept nagging me to let him rebuild it at the shop. Route 19 stretched ahead through Millbrook's outskirts, nothing but darkness and the occasional reflective postmarking where the asphalt met the drainage ditch. I'd just finished wrestling with Mrs. Crawford's Buick transmission for the past 6 hours, grease still caked under my fingernails, despite scrubbing them raw with that orange pumice soap. The radio crackled with static between stations. You could never get decent reception once you passed the Dawson farm. November nights in West Virginia had a particular weight to them, cold seeping through the truck's worn weather stripping, making me crank the heater that only worked on the highest setting. My phone showed 11:07 p.m. on the cracked screen, and I was already planning which leftover to heat up first when the lights hit my mirrors. Red and blue, alternating in that pattern that makes your chest tighten even when you know you've done nothing wrong. The cruiser appeared out of nowhere. I hadn't seen headlights behind me for the last 10 miles. I eased off the gas and pulled onto the narrow shoulder where the field met the road, dry corn stubble on one side and thick woods on the other. Through the side mirror, I watched the Crown Victoria settle in behind me, its engine idling rough. Probably one of those old Interceptors the county bought at auction and never properly maintained. The spotlight snapped on, flooding everything in surgical white brightness that turned my cab into a fishbowl. I killed the engine and rolled down my window, cold air rushing in along with the sound of boots on gravel approaching from behind. The deputy who appeared at my window wasn't anyone I recognized, which was strange in a place where you knew every cop by their coffee order. He had one of those faces that seemed assembled from mismatched parts. Nose too sharp, jaw too wide, eyes set deep enough that the spotlight's glare couldn't reach them. His uniform looked regulation except for how it hung on him, like it belonged to someone else, someone bigger. The nameplate read Deputy Carlisle, but the letters seemed worn, hard to make out. He leaned down, bringing with him the smell of cigarettes and something else. Something chemical like antifreeze or formaldehyde. His flashlight beam hit my face, then swept through the cab's interior, lingering on my toolbox in the passenger footwell. The work invoices scattered on the dash, finally settling on my hands gripping the steering wheel. "License and registration," he said, but his voice had this quality to it like he was reading lines he'd memorized but didn't quite understand. I reached for my wallet, moving slow and deliberate the way my dad taught me, announcing each movement. The deputy watched my hands with an intensity that made the hair on my neck prickle. When I handed over my documents, his fingers were ice cold despite the thick gloves he wore, and he held my license up to his flashlight for what felt like a full minute, studying it like he was memorizing every detail. "Your taillight's out," he finally said, still staring at my ID. "Going to need you to step out of the vehicle so we can take a look at it together." The way he said "together" made my mouth go dry. I knew for a fact both taillights were working, I'd checked them myself that morning when I'd done the routine maintenance on the truck. Frank was particular about his employees maintaining their vehicles, said it was bad advertising for a mechanic to drive around with broken lights or squealing brakes. "Deputy, I'm sure they're both working fine," I said, keeping my voice level despite the crawling sensation working its way up my spine. "I can show you from here if you'd like." He tapped my license against the window frame, a rhythmic sound that seemed too loud in the quiet night. Each tap left a small mark on the glass, and I noticed his wedding ring was on the wrong hand, worn on his right ring finger instead of the left. "Need you to step out," he repeated, and this time his free hand moved to rest on his service weapon. Not threatening exactly, but deliberate enough to make the message clear. The woods beside us were silent. No insects, no wind through the trees, like everything was holding its breath. I unbuckled my seatbelt slowly, and that's when I saw it in the side mirror. There was someone else in the cruiser's passenger seat. Just a shadow, really. But definitely there, not moving, just watching. The gravel crunched under my boots as I stepped out, and immediately Deputy Carlisle positioned himself between me and my truck door, close enough that I could see the stubble on his neck was growing in strange patches, like a bad skin graft. "Walk to the back," he instructed, gesturing with his flashlight toward my truck bed. As we moved, I noticed the cruiser's license plate was covered in mud, deliberately it seemed, and the unit number on the side was partially scraped off. We stopped at the tailgate, and I could clearly see both lights glowing red in the reflection off the cruiser's hood. "See, Deputy? They're both working." He stood there for a moment, flashlight beam dancing between the perfectly functional taillights, then turned to me with this expression that wasn't quite a smile. "No, that one's definitely out," he said, pointing to the left light that was clearly illuminated. "You need to come sit in my vehicle while I write this up. Department policy for safety violations." Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, but where would I go? Miles of empty road in either direction, thick woods on both sides, and this deputy with his hand still casual on his weapon. "I'd rather wait by my truck if that's all right," I said, pulling out my phone. "Let me just call my roommate to let him know I'll be late." The screen wouldn't turn on, completely dead even though it had been at 40% when I left the shop. Carlisle noticed and made this sound in his throat, not quite a laugh. "No need for calls. This'll just take a minute." He stepped closer, and I could smell that chemical odor again, stronger now, making my eyes water. "Protocol says you need to sit in the cruiser. Don't make this difficult." Behind him, that shadow in his passenger seat shifted slightly, and I caught a glimpse of what looked like hair, long and tangled, pressed against the window. "I know my rights," I said, taking a step backward toward my truck. "I don't have to sit in your vehicle for a traffic citation." Something changed in his posture then, a stillness that reminded me of a snake before it strikes. He pulled his radio from his belt, but when he pressed the button, no static came through, no dispatcher response. The thing wasn't even turned on. "Unit 12 requesting backup at mile marker 37, he said into the dead radio, his eyes never leaving mine. Driver being non-compliant. He clipped it back to his belt like he'd actually spoken to someone, then said in this flat, emotionless voice, "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time. Get in the cruiser." The spotlight from his car suddenly went out, plunging us into darkness except for his flashlight beam. And in that moment of adjustment, I heard car doors opening. Not just his, but multiple doors, like there were more vehicles I couldn't see. I didn't wait to find out who or what was coming out of those cars. I bolted toward my truck, yanking the door handle just as Carlisle's hand grabbed my shoulder. His grip was impossibly strong, fingers digging in through my jacket, but I twisted hard and felt the fabric tear as I pulled free. I threw myself into the cab, slamming the locks just as his flashlight smashed against the window, leaving a spiderweb crack. The engine turned over on the third try while fists pounded on the glass. And not just Carlisle's, I could see other shapes in my peripheral vision, surrounding the truck. One face pressed against the passenger window, mouth moving like it was trying to speak, but the features were all wrong. skin too loose like a mask that didn't fit right. I threw it in drive and floored it, gravel spraying as the truck lurched forward. And in the rear view I saw at least 3 figures standing in the road, all wearing what looked like sheriff's department uniforms, all watching me drive away without pursuing. I didn't slow down until I hit the Millbrook city limits, pulling into the 24-hour gas station with my whole body trembling, adrenaline making everything too bright and sharp. The attendant, a kid named Jerome who I'd gone to high school with, took one look at me and asked if I needed him to call someone. I almost said yes, call the police, but then stopped. What would I say? A deputy tried to get me in his car? I asked Jerome if he knew a Deputy Carlisle, and he gave me this confused look. There's only 4 deputies in the whole county, man. Robinson, Vance, Harrell, and that new lady Simmons. No Carlisle. My torn jacket and the cracked window were the only proof I had that anything had happened. Jerome let me use the station phone to call Frank, told him I'd had car trouble and wouldn't make it in tomorrow. Then I sat in that fluorescent-lit gas station until dawn, drinking coffee that tasted like burnt water, watching every car that passed. The next few days I kept my mouth shut, went to work, stayed in town after dark. But I started asking careful questions, casual-like, while changing oil or rotating tires. That's when the stories started surfacing. Old Mrs. Henley mentioned her nephew from 2 towns over who'd gone missing on Route 19 6 months back. Car found abandoned with the driver door open. Jerome's cousin had a friend who swore he'd been pulled over by a deputy that didn't exist. Barely got away when 2 other cruisers appeared out of nowhere. The more I dug, the more I found. Always Route 19, always between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m., always someone traveling alone. The real sheriff's department, when I finally worked up the nerve to check, had no record of any traffic stops at mile marker 37 that night. They suggested I might have encountered someone impersonating an officer, took a report, said they'd investigate. But I could tell from their faces they'd heard this before, and nothing ever came of it. I left Millbrook 2 weeks later, packed everything I could fit in that Ford Ranger with its cracked window, and drove straight through to Ohio without stopping. Found another mechanic job, another small town, but one with more people and better cell service. Frank understood, didn't even make me work out my notice. Before I left, Jerome pulled me aside at the gas station and handed me a folder. Inside were newspaper clippings he'd been collecting, going back 3 years. Missing persons reports, abandoned vehicles, all connected to that stretch of Route 19. The last clipping was from just 2 days after my encounter. A traveling salesman from Maryland, last seen heading through Millbrook around midnight. His car was found the next morning at mile marker 37. Driver door open, both taillights working perfectly. They never found him, just like the others. I still check the West Virginia news sometimes, looking for updates, but deep down I know the truth. Whatever's happening on Route 19, it's still happening. And the real horror is that someone, somewhere, knows exactly what it is. "6 months working as head librarian at the public library in Rosewood, Georgia had taught me the rhythm of small-town life. Everybody knows everybody here, the kind of place where the biggest scandal is usually who forgot to return their library books on time. The library itself is this beautiful old brick building from the 1920s, with tall windows that let in streams of dusty light and wooden floors that creak with every step. Most days, I'd spend my time helping high school kids with research papers, or chatting with the elderly regulars who came in for the air conditioning and romance novels. Mrs. Eloise would bring me tomatoes from her garden, and old Mr. Hutchins would fall asleep in the biography section every Friday afternoon like clockwork. It was peaceful, predictable, exactly what I needed after the chaos of Atlanta. The town had maybe 3,000 people, 2 traffic lights, and 1 main street where everyone did their shopping. The city council had finally approved renovations for the library's basement after years of water damage complaints. We needed to clear out decades of accumulated junk before the contractors could start work the following Monday. I volunteered to handle it myself because I wanted to catalog everything properly. There could be town history down there worth preserving. The basement was this maze of metal shelving units packed with donation boxes nobody had touched since the 80s, old equipment covered in dust sheets, and stacks of yellowing newspapers tied with twine. The air was thick with that musty smell of old paper and mildew. Behind a wall of moldy encyclopedias that practically disintegrated when I moved them, I found 3 cardboard boxes sealed with heavy-duty packing tape that had turned yellow and brittle with age. Someone had written "Property of Rosewood PD, do not destroy" across the top in faded black marker. My curiosity got the better of me. The tape practically crumbled when I cut through it with my box cutter. Inside the first box were manila folders, dozens of them, each one containing what looked like missing person reports. The paper was that old government-issue beige color, typewritten with actual typewriter keys that left indentations you could feel with your fingers. Names, dates, photographs paperclipped to the corners. People who had vanished from Rosewood going back to the 1960s. What caught my attention wasn't just the number of files, but how each one was stamped "closed" in red ink, with no resolution notes, no follow-up reports, nothing to indicate what happened to these people. Just name after name. Louise Carpenter, age 23, disappeared May 1967. Robert Nguyen, age 45, disappeared October 1973. Teenage kids, middle-aged parents, elderly folks, no pattern to the ages or backgrounds. The second and third boxes contained more of the same. By my count, there were 78 missing person cases, all from Rosewood and the surrounding county, all marked closed without any explanation. The most recent file was from 2008, a woman named Maria Vasquez who worked at the local grocery store. I actually remembered when she supposedly moved away suddenly to care for a sick relative in California. That's what everyone said anyway. But here was her file, reported missing by her landlord when she didn't pay rent, her car found abandoned on Route 42. The responding officer's notes mentioned blood on the driver's seat, but the case was closed 2 days later with no further investigation documented. I spent the next 3 hours photographing every single page with my phone. The battery died twice, and I had to run upstairs to charge it at my desk, terrified someone would come down and find me with these files. My mind kept racing. How could a town this small have so many missing people without anyone talking about it? We had a weekly newspaper, town meetings, gossipy neighbors who knew when you changed your curtains. But 78 people gone, and nobody ever mentioned it. The dates were spread out enough, maybe 3 or 4 per year, that perhaps people just forgot, moved on, accepted whatever story they were told. But seeing them all together like this, documented in black and white, made my chest tight with anxiety. That evening, I couldn't stop thinking about those files. I made the mistake of going to see Chief Coleman at the police station. He'd always been friendly when I'd seen him around town. Mid-50s, coached Little League. The type who'd help you change a flat tire. The station was just a small building next to the post office. Only 4 officers total for the whole town. When I told him about the boxes, showed him a few photos on my phone, his whole demeanor changed. His jaw clenched, and he leaned back in his chair, studying me with this calculating look I'd never seen before. "Those records are sealed for a reason," he said slowly, each word deliberate. "Some things are better left buried. Delete those photos, return the boxes to where you found them, and forget you ever saw them, for your own good." The way he said it wasn't threatening exactly, but it made every hair on my arm stand up. I didn't delete the photos. Instead, I went home to my little rental house on Sycamore Lane and uploaded everything to 3 different cloud services. Then I started researching the names from the files. Most led to dead ends. No social media, no obituaries, no mentions in other towns. But a few had family members still looking for them. I found a Facebook group called Missing Voices of North Georgia, where a woman named Beverly was still posting about her sister Louise Carpenter every year on the anniversary of her disappearance. The same Louise from the 1967 file. Beverly lived just 2 hours away in Marietta. I sent her a private message, attached the photos of her sister's file, and asked if she wanted to meet. She responded within minutes. "How did you get this? I've been trying to get information from Rosewood PD for 40 years. That's when the black SUV appeared. The first night, Wednesday, I noticed it parked across from my house around 10 p.m. when I was closing the living room curtains. Government plates, tinted windows so dark you couldn't see inside. It was still there when I checked at midnight, at 3 a.m. when I got up for water, and gone by sunrise. Thursday night, same thing, except this time it was parked one house down. By Friday, it was right in front of my mailbox. I tried taking a photo of the license plate, but they'd covered it with mud. Deliberately. Just enough to obscure the numbers, but not enough to look suspicious to anyone passing by. I knew they wanted me to see them, to know I was being watched. The message was clear without anyone saying a word. Saturday morning, I met Beverly at a diner in Dahlonega, halfway between Rosewood and Marietta. She was in her 70s, thin and sharp-eyed, carrying a worn folder full of her own research about Louise. Her hands trembled when she saw the police file photos on my phone. "They told us she ran off with some boy," she whispered, voice cracking. "Said she'd been seeing someone secretly. My parents believed them, but I knew Louise. She was planning to start nursing school that fall, had already bought her textbooks. Beverly showed me letters she'd written to the FBI, the state police, even the governor's office over the years. Every single one had been redirected back to Rosewood PD, who always gave the same response. Case closed, no evidence of foul play. She told me about other families she'd connected with over the years, all with missing relatives from the Rosewood area, all given similar excuses. What Beverly said next made my mouth go dry. Her nephew was a state trooper, and he'd done some unofficial digging for her about 5 years earlier. He'd found property records showing that the Rosewood Police Department owned 16 acres of undeveloped land about 8 miles outside town, purchased in 1962. The land had no buildings, no stated purpose, just thick woods and a single dirt access road. But satellite images from Google Earth showed regular tire tracks leading in and out, and what looked like disturbed earth in several areas, patches where the vegetation grew differently. When he tried to access the property to investigate further, he was pulled over by Chief Coleman himself and told his career would be over if he ever came back to Rosewood. He'd transferred to a different county the next week and refused to talk about it anymore, even to Beverly. I gave Beverly copies of all the files I'd photographed. We agreed she'd share them with the other families, while I tried to find a journalist who might investigate. But when I got home that afternoon, my front door was standing wide open. Nothing was stolen, nothing destroyed, but everything had been touched. Every book on my shelves was pulled out exactly 1 inch. Every picture frame was turned to face the wall. My kitchen drawers were all open precisely halfway. Even my bed sheets were folded down in a perfect triangle, like in a hotel. The precision of it was worse than if they'd ransacked the place. They wanted me to know they'd been through everything, that they could enter whenever they wanted. I found my laptop in the refrigerator, still running, with a sticky note on the screen that just said, "Stop." My phone, which I'd left charging in the bedroom, was now in the bathroom sink, displaying a photo I hadn't taken, a picture of me at the diner with Beverly, shot from a distance through the window. That night, I packed everything important and drove to my cousin's house in Tennessee. I didn't tell anyone in Rosewood I was leaving, just never showed up to work Monday morning. I later heard they said I had a family emergency, then that I'd had a nervous breakdown, and eventually that I'd taken a job elsewhere. The same kind of stories they'd probably told about those 78 missing people. I sent all the files to 3 different news outlets and the FBI field office in Atlanta, but nothing ever came of it. Beverly called me once to say 2 other families had received visits from Rosewood police, warning them about spreading false information. She was scared but determined to keep fighting. I still check the news for Rosewood sometimes, waiting for the story to break, for someone to investigate that 16 acres of woods. But small towns keep their secrets, and sometimes the people sworn to protect and serve are the ones making sure those secrets stay buried. My name's Aaron, and a few years ago I worked the overnight shift at the only 24-hour gas station in our town in Kentucky. The pay wasn't great, but it gave me enough to cover rent on my little duplex and keep food in the fridge. Nights there had their own rhythm. Truckers topping off their rigs, regulars grabbing cigarettes, and the occasional drifter passing through. I got used to the hum of the soda machine, the buzzing neon sign that never stayed fully lit, and the kind of silence that settled between customers when the hours stretched too long. One night started out the same as any other. I stocked the cooler, swept the floors, and leaned against the counter scrolling on my phone whenever things slowed down. Around midnight, I noticed an older sedan pulling into the lot. The headlights washed over the windows before it circled once and rolled back onto the road. At first, I didn't think much of it. People miss the entrance all the time, or they realize they're low on cash and drive off. But then, maybe 20 minutes later, the same car came through again, looping around slow enough that I could make out its dented bumper and one dim headlight. By the third time that car came back, creeping around the pumps without stopping, I felt a knot forming in my chest. No one got out. No one rolled a window down. Just that same slow lap, tires crunching over gravel, before disappearing again into the night. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was someone lost, or maybe waiting for someone else. But the longer the hours dragged on, the harder it was to ignore the way my stomach tightened every time I thought I saw headlights in the distance. Around 4 in the morning, my shift was ending, and I went about locking up. That's when I spotted it. Down the street past the edge of the lot, the same sedan sat parked on the shoulder. Its headlights were off, but I could still recognize the shape, the dent in the hood, the dull shine of its paint under the street lamp. I stood with the keys in my hand, pretending to fumble with the lock longer than I needed to, just to keep from turning my back completely. It didn't move. No door opened. It just sat there, like it was waiting for me to leave first. I finally made it to my car, trying not to glance too obviously in the direction of the sedan. The air felt heavy, the kind of quiet that made every sound sharper. My keys jingling, the slam of my door, the click of my seatbelt. When I pulled onto the road, I kept my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. For the first couple of blocks, nothing happened. Then, just as I started to think I'd imagined the whole thing, headlights flickered on behind me. The same car, same dented bumper. It eased onto the road, trailing me at a steady distance. My heart pounded so loud it almost drowned out the hum of my engine. I didn't want to drive straight home, so I made a few random turns through the quiet streets, circling blocks I didn't normally take. The car followed each one, never speeding up, never backing off. It was like they knew I was testing them and were content to let me know they weren't going anywhere. After 10 minutes of this, I pulled into a brightly lit parking lot near an all-night diner and just sat there, pretending to dig through my bag. The sedan slowed as it passed but didn't turn in. It kept going, disappearing down the next street. When I finally got home, it was already past 5. I barely slept, every little sound outside pulling me back awake. The next morning, I thought maybe I'd worked myself up over nothing, that whoever it was had just been messing around or drunk. But when I showed up for my next shift, one of the officers from the local police department came into the store. He leaned on the counter, asked if I'd seen a certain car the night before, and described it down to the dent in the hood. My throat went dry. I told him everything, how it circled 3 times, then sat parked down the street. The officer nodded like he wasn't surprised. He said they'd found the car abandoned near the edge of town, doors unlocked. Inside, there were rolls of duct tape, a pack of zip ties, and a pair of gloves shoved into the glove box. He didn't say much else, just told me to be careful walking to my car and to call if I noticed anything strange again. I stood behind that counter long after he left, staring at the pumps in the empty lot beyond, trying to wrap my head around how close I might have come to being someone's target that night. The rest of that week felt unreal. Every time headlights appeared in the distance, I caught myself holding my breath. Customers came and went like always, but I couldn't shake the image of that car sitting in the dark, waiting. Even walking through the aisles of the gas station gave me a strange awareness. How isolated the place really was after midnight. How long it would take anyone to notice if something happened to me. I stopped wearing headphones, stopped stepping outside to smoke on breaks. I kept every door locked and the phone close at hand. A couple of nights later, another officer came by and asked if anyone had approached me in the parking lot. I said no, and he explained that the vehicle had been reported stolen. They never found the person who had been driving it. That detail rattled me worse than anything else. The thought that someone out there, someone who had circled me over and over, was still walking around free made it hard to concentrate on even the simplest tasks. Every face that came into the store became a question mark I couldn't answer. After that, I changed routines. I started parking my car right under the brightest light in the lot and asked a coworker to stay on the phone with me until I was safely inside. For weeks, I couldn't stop running through possibilities in my head. Was it a robbery that never happened? Something worse? Did they just get spooked when they realized the police were nearby? None of it added up, and not knowing became its own kind of weight I carried into every shift. People in town whispered about it for a while, but eventually, like most things, the talk faded. I never saw that sedan again, but I also never worked another overnight alone. To this day, when someone asks why I quit the gas station, I don't say much. I just tell them the truth in the simplest way I can. Once you've had someone circle you like prey, and then find out what they had waiting in the car, you stop pretending those long, quiet nights are harmless. You start seeing the dark for what it really is, a cover for people you'd rather never meet. The town where I grew up didn't have much going on besides a strip mall, a football field, and that abandoned hospital on the edge of the old industrial district. Everyone had their own stories about it, but most were just recycled rumors, flickering lights in the windows, strange noises after dark, someone swearing they saw a figure in a white gown through the third-floor glass. By senior year, people treated it more like a rite of passage than anything else. Sneak in, take a few pictures, maybe record a video, and prove you weren't scared of a crumbling building. That autumn weekend, a couple of friends and I thought it'd be fun to head inside and get some footage for a short video. I was more into filming than they were, so I brought along my camera. The hospital loomed over the street, 4 stories of shattered windows and vines crawling up the brick. Even in daylight, it had this heavy presence, like the walls themselves were holding back secrets no one should uncover. My friends joked around, but I remember feeling uneasy before we even stepped through the broken side door. The inside reeked of mold and something sharper, maybe old chemicals soaked into the walls, paint peeled in long strips, hanging down like dead skin. Every step echoed way too loudly, as if the place was hollow, amplifying even the smallest sound. We wandered through hallways lined with rusted gurneys, graffiti covering the tiles. My friends mostly stuck together on the main floor, but I wanted better shots, so I drifted further, drawn to the stairwell that led down to the basement. The light there was weaker, my flashlight beam shaking across the walls as I went down. The basement was worse than I expected. Water pooled in corners, and the ceiling pipes dripped steadily, like a metronome ticking away the silence. That's where I found them. Dozens of patient files scattered across the damp concrete, their folders swollen with water damage. What made me stop wasn't just that they were left there, but that every single one had a red stamp across the cover. Deceased. I flipped through several, and something about them felt wrong. The patients had died in different years, but somehow all of them were listed as having died on the same exact day of the calendar. The deeper I dug into those files, the heavier the air felt. One folder belonged to a man in his 60s, another to a teenager, yet both had deceased stamped across the same day of the same month. I shuffled through at least a dozen before realizing they all matched. It didn't make sense. Different years, different circumstances, but the identical date repeated over and over. The hairs on my arms stood straight as I tried to convince myself it was some clerical error, maybe a lazy administrator reusing a stamp. Still, the thought of it lingered in my head like a riddle I wasn't supposed to solve. I remember hearing my friends laughing faintly upstairs, their voices bouncing through the pipes. But down there it sounded warped, almost muffled. The further I stood among those files, the more I felt like I shouldn't be down there at all. My flashlight flickered, and for a split second I thought I saw movement at the far end of the hallway. Just a shift of shadow, nothing I could define. My instinct told me to leave, but instead I crouched and stuffed one of the folders into my backpack. I wanted proof, something I could show them later so they'd believe me. When we left the hospital, the sun had already dipped low, turning the sky a dim orange. My friends were still joking, calling the trip a bust because nothing dramatic had happened. I didn't mention the files. It felt personal, like if I talked about it too soon, it would lose its weight or sound like I was making it up. We piled into my old sedan, and I tossed my camera bag onto the passenger seat, glancing back once at the hospital. For a moment I swear I saw a light flicker in one of the basement windows, even though there hadn't been power there in decades. That night, after dropping everyone off, I parked outside my house and sat in the driveway, scrolling through the footage. The camera had captured everything, the graffiti, the dripping pipes, and finally those patient files. Watching it back made the whole thing feel worse, like the basement had swallowed sound differently than I remembered. I left the bag locked inside the car, figuring I'd edit the clips the next day. When I came out the following morning, the driver's side door was cracked open. My wallet was still there, my backpack untouched. The only thing missing was the camera. I tore the car apart, searching every corner, thinking maybe I'd misplaced it or left it with one of my friends. But the bag was right where I'd left it, only the camera was gone. No shattered glass, no sign of forced entry. Almost like whoever took it knew exactly what they were looking for. My neighbors didn't report seeing anything, and none of the other cars on the street had been touched. Out of everything inside, only the camera had vanished. The weirdest part was that the folder I'd stuffed in my backpack was still there. I pulled it out, the paper warped and damp, the red deceased stamp bleeding faintly through the cover. Holding it made me uneasy in a way I can't explain, like the file wasn't supposed to exist outside that basement. I thought about bringing it to school, showing my friends, but something about the missing footage made me hesitate. If someone went out of their way to take the camera, maybe they didn't want that evidence seen again. A couple of days later, I worked up the courage to open the folder one last time. The details blurred together, hard to read through the water stains, but the death date was still clear. That's when I noticed something I'd missed. The signature at the bottom wasn't from a doctor or nurse, but from someone listed simply as attending. No name, no credentials, just that word repeated on every file. I shoved the folder back into my drawer, and to this day I haven't looked at it again. I never got the camera back. I reported the theft, but the police shrugged, said it was probably kids or someone looking to pawn electronics. But I know better. Someone broke into my car, skipped over cash and personal stuff, and took only the one thing holding proof of what I'd found. I can't prove it, but part of me is convinced that whatever secrets were buried in that hospital are meant to stay buried. The folder is still hidden in my closet, and sometimes late at night, I wonder if keeping it was the worst mistake I ever made. That night had started out in the usual small-town way, with everyone packed into the bleachers for the weekly high school football game. My girlfriend Emily and I weren't even that into football, but in our town, it was basically the only real entertainment on a Friday. I remember the sharp chill in the air when we left the field, the smell of concession stand popcorn still clinging to our jackets. We decided to take the long way home, the quieter county road that cut through farmland and patches of pine. It was late enough that traffic had thinned out, and the road felt like it belonged to us alone. I was behind the wheel of my old Chevy sedan, the heater humming against the cold. Emily sat next to me scrolling through her phone, the blue glow lighting up her face. We had the radio low, just background noise, some old country station that never came in clearly. The stretch we were on was dark. No streetlights, just the beams of our headlights carving a tunnel through the night. Every now and then we'd pass a mailbox leaning toward the ditch or a barn set way back from the road, but otherwise it was empty space and shadows. About halfway down that stretch, I noticed movement ahead. At first I thought it was a deer on the shoulder, so I slowed just a little. Then the figure stepped forward, illuminated in the glare of my headlights. It was a man standing by the ditch with one arm raised high, waving as if to flag us down. His clothes looked rough, layers of flannel and a dark jacket, and his posture was strange, too stiff, like he'd been waiting there. Emily leaned forward, squinting, and muttered, "Do you see that?" I eased off the gas, not stopping but letting the car slow enough to take a better look. The man didn't stumble or look injured, which struck me as odd. He was deliberate, standing like someone who knew exactly what he was doing. When our car drew closer, he suddenly broke into a sprint straight toward us, his arm no longer raised in distress. That's when I saw the metallic glint in his other hand, the unmistakable shape of a tire iron catching the light. Instinct took over and I slammed my foot back on the gas. The tires squealed against the pavement and the car lurched forward. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of him swinging the tire iron downward, like he had actually tried to smash the windshield or grab onto the car. Emily let out this sharp gasp, clutching the side of her seat, and all I could hear for the next few seconds was the engine straining and her breathing quick. The road stretched out ahead of us like it would never end, and I didn't dare slow down. My pulse was hammering so hard it felt like it was inside my ears. For a few miles we said nothing, just sitting in the glow of the dashboard lights, trying to process what had almost just happened. Emily finally broke the silence, her voice tight, asking if I thought we should call the sheriff's office. At first, I wasn't even sure what I had seen. Had I overreacted? Maybe he wasn't running at us? But the memory of that metal in his hand, catching our headlights, left no doubt. This wasn't someone broken down on the side of the road. This was someone lying in wait. We pulled into the first gas station that still had its lights on and parked near the front door under the buzzing fluorescence. I got out, legs shaky, and walked inside to ask if I could use their landline since cell service in that area was spotty. The cashier, an older guy with a long gray beard and a name tag that read Dennis, listened as I explained what had happened. His expression hardened immediately, like this wasn't the first time he'd heard something like it. He nodded slowly and said he'd make the call for us, his voice low as if he didn't want anyone else in the store overhearing. While Dennis was on the phone with the sheriff's department, Emily came in and told me her brother had texted her that there were already rumors going around about someone dangerous along that same stretch of road. She said a couple of people she knew had mentioned seeing a guy waving cars down, claiming his truck had broken down. The difference was, in those stories, he'd supposedly gotten closer before anyone noticed the weapon. Hearing that made my skin prickle. This wasn't a one-time thing we'd stumbled into by bad luck. It felt more like we had brushed right up against something planned, rehearsed, and escalating. Not long after, a deputy pulled up outside the station and came in to talk to us. His uniform was wrinkled, like he'd been called in from home, but he carried himself with the kind of seriousness that told me he already knew the situation. He asked for every detail, what the man looked like, what he was wearing, which direction he'd come from. When I mentioned the tire iron, the deputy's jaw tightened, and he told us we weren't the only ones who had called that night. A few other drivers had nearly been ambushed along that same road, each describing the same man with the same weapon. The deputy walked us back out to my car and inspected the windshield and hood with his flashlight, almost like he expected to find dents. Seeing the light sweep over the chipped paint and the dust clinging to the bumper made me realize how close it had been. Emily stayed quiet, her arms folded tight, watching the deputy as though he might have answers we didn't. Before letting us go, he warned us to avoid that stretch of road for the time being. He didn't sugarcoat it. This guy's looking for victims, not help. When we finally got home, the adrenaline wore off, and the whole thing settled on me like a weight. I kept replaying it in my head, the way the man stood so still until we were close enough, then the sudden sprint, the flash of metal. It wasn't random. It was a trap, set in a place where most people wouldn't think twice about stopping to help someone. What scared me most wasn't just what almost happened to us, but the thought of who might not have been lucky enough to hit the gas in time. To this day, I don't know if the deputies ever caught the man. I never saw anything about it in the local paper, and nobody in town brought it up after a week or two. Life just moved on like it does in small towns. But for me, that stretch of road never looked the same again. Even now, when I pass by an empty shoulder at night, my foot hovers over the accelerator, and I catch myself scanning the darkness for movement, half expecting someone to step out of the ditch, waving me down with one hand and hiding something dangerous in the other. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. Snow has a sound when it falls at night, a kind of soft whisper that most people probably find peaceful. When you sleep under a bridge or tucked behind a dumpster, that whisper sounds more like a countdown. Every flake that lands on your sleeping bag is another tiny weight pressing down, another degree stolen from your body, another minute closer to the moment when you might not wake up. I turned 34 the same week the first real storm hit Omaha last January. Someone at the soup kitchen handed me a stale cupcake with a crooked candle, and I sat there staring at it for a long time before I could eat it. Not because I was ungrateful, but because birthdays on the street feel like mock celebrations, like throwing a party on a sinking ship. Another year survived, sure, but at what cost and for how much longer? Pete Garrison understood that feeling better than anyone I knew out there. We had met 2 winters prior at a warming center near the old railroad depot, both shivering so violently that our teeth chattered in unison like some broken percussion instrument. Pete was maybe 55 years old, with a gray beard stained yellow around his mouth from decades of cigarettes, and these watery blue eyes that always seemed to be searching for something he had lost and would never find again. He told me once that he had worked as a plumber for 23 years, owned a little house with a paid-off mortgage, had a wife named Ruth who made the best chicken pot pie in all of Nebraska. Then Ruth got pancreatic cancer, and 6 months later, Pete was sitting in an empty house that suddenly felt like a tomb. The grief ate him alive. He stopped showing up to work, stopped paying bills, stopped caring whether he lived or died. By the time he found himself on the streets, he said it almost felt like relief, like he had finally stopped pretending that life without Ruth was worth fighting for. That January had been brutal from the start, but the weather forecast for that particular Wednesday made even the veterans nervous. The temperature was supposed to drop to -15, with wind chills pushing it closer to -30. I remember standing outside the library on Monday afternoon, watching people rush past in their puffy jackets and heated car seats, and thinking about how fragile the line is between their world and mine. One bad month, one medical bill, one layoff, that is all it takes. The shelters were already announcing they would be over capacity, turning people away by lottery like some sick game show where the losers might freeze to death. Pete and I talked about our options that afternoon, sitting on milk crates behind the Vietnamese grocery store, where the owner sometimes let us warm up near the back vent. We decided to stick together, find a spot in the underground parking garage on Farnham Street, where the concrete held some heat from the cars coming and going. But Pete never showed up that night. I waited for him until almost 9, stomping my feet and blowing into my hands, watching my breath crystallize and disappear into the darkness. He had mentioned something about checking the recycling bins near the university. He collected cans and bottles to buy cigarettes, one of the few pleasures he had left. And I figured maybe he had found a better spot, or gotten into one of the church basements that sometimes opened during emergencies. I told myself not to worry, that Pete had survived worse winters than this, that he knew the tricks better than most. So I hunkered down alone in the corner of that parking garage, wrapped myself in every piece of fabric I owned, and tried to sleep while the wind howled outside like something hungry. My dreams were fragmented and strange, full of images of Ruth standing in a kitchen I had never seen, beckoning Pete toward a door filled with white light. I woke up around 4 in the morning, shaking uncontrollably, and I knew right then that something was wrong. The sun came up around 7:30, pale and distant like it was embarrassed to show its face after what the night had done. I started walking toward the university, retracing the route Pete usually took when he went collecting. The streets were quiet in that eerie way they get after a deep freeze. No joggers, no dog walkers, just the occasional car creeping along with frost still clinging to its windows. My boots crunched against the salted sidewalks, and every breath felt like inhaling broken glass. I checked the usual spots, the alley behind the student union where the recycling bins overflowed on weekends, the loading dock near the science building where warm air sometimes leaked from the ventilation system, the bus stop shelter on Dodge Street, where Pete liked to sit and watch the college kids go by. Nothing. No sign of him anywhere. A janitor coming out of one of the dormitories looked at me with that familiar mixture of pity and disgust, and I wanted to grab him by his clean uniform and ask if he had seen an old man with a yellow beard, but I knew how that would end. I found Pete in the narrow alley between a laundromat and a pawn shop on Leavenworth Street, about 6 blocks from where I had been searching. He was sitting upright against the brick wall, his legs stretched out in front of him, his hands resting on his thighs like he had just decided to take a break and catch his breath. For one horrible second, I thought he was alive. His eyes were open, staring straight ahead at the dumpster across from him, and there was an expression on his face that looked almost peaceful, like he had finally figured out the answer to a question that had been bothering him for years. But then I got closer and saw the frost on his eyelashes, the blue tint around his lips, the way his skin had taken on a waxy texture that no living person ever has. I said his name once, twice, 3 times, each time louder than the last, but my voice just bounced off the walls and disappeared into the frozen air. Pete was gone. He had been gone for hours, probably since sometime before midnight when the temperature had bottomed out and his body had simply surrendered to the cold. I sat down next to him on that frozen concrete, not caring anymore about preserving my own body heat, and I stayed there for what felt like an eternity. His shopping cart was parked a few feet away, still loaded with the plastic bags full of cans and bottles he had collected, maybe $8 worth if he was lucky. That is what his last hours on Earth had been spent doing, digging through trash so he could afford a pack of cigarettes and maybe a cup of coffee from the gas station. I noticed his gloves were missing, probably lost or stolen weeks ago, and his hands were bare and curled slightly inward like claws. The nails had turned a deep purple, almost black. I reached over and touched his shoulder, and it was like touching a statue, completely rigid and utterly foreign to anything resembling human warmth. A sound came out of my mouth that I did not recognize, something between a moan and a scream, and I pressed my forehead against his arm and let the grief tear through me like a winter wind, finding every crack in a broken window. Eventually, a woman walked by the alley entrance, probably on her way to work at one of the shops on the street. She glanced in, did a double take, and then pulled out her phone to call 911. I heard her voice high and panicked, describing what she saw. 2 homeless men, one possibly dead, please send someone quickly. She did not come any closer, did not ask if I was okay, did not offer any comfort at all. She just stood at the mouth of the alley with her phone pressed to her ear, watching us like we were animals at a zoo exhibit. that had suddenly become disturbing instead of entertaining. The paramedics arrived about 15 minutes later, followed by a police cruiser with 2 officers who looked bored before they even got out of the car. One of them asked me if I knew the deceased, and I almost laughed at the word. Deceased, like Pete was just a file to be processed, a statistic to be recorded, a problem that had conveniently solved itself by dying in an alley where nobody important would have to see. They zipped Pete into a black body bag and loaded him into a van that did not even have windows in the back. I asked one of the paramedics where they would take him, and she told me the county morgue, where he would stay until they could locate next of kin or, failing that, arrange for a pauper's burial in the municipal cemetery. I thought about Pete's daughter, the one he had mentioned only once in all the time I knew him. She lived somewhere in California, had changed her phone number years ago after one too many desperate calls asking for money. He never blamed her for cutting him off. He said he understood that watching someone you love destroy themselves is its own kind of torture, that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is walk away before the drowning man pulls you under with him. But standing there watching that van drive away with his body inside, I wondered if she would ever find out, if some bureaucrat would track her down and deliver the news over the phone like it was a overdue library notice. Your father is dead. He froze to death behind a laundromat. Would you like to claim the body? Here is what people do not understand about dying from exposure. It is not like the movies where someone dramatically collapses in a snowbank. Hypothermia is slow and insidious and almost gentle in its cruelty. Your body starts by pulling blood away from your extremities, sacrificing your fingers and toes to keep your core warm, and you feel this deep, aching cold that settles into your bones like something alive. Then the shivering starts, violent and uncontrollable, your muscles burning through whatever energy you have left trying to generate heat. But eventually the shivering stops, and that is when you know you are in real trouble. Your body has given up the fight, accepted defeat, started shutting down systems one by one like a building going dark floor by floor. The strangest part is that near the end, many people actually feel warm. Their confused brains misinterpret the signals, and they start stripping off their clothes, convinced they are overheating. They call it paradoxical undressing, and it is one of the ways they identify hypothermia victims. Pete still had all his clothes on when I found him, so at least he was spared that final indignity. But I think about those last hours, alone in that alley, and I wonder if he called out for Ruth if he thought she was coming to take him home. The newspapers ran a small story the next day, buried somewhere in the local section between a report on a school board meeting and an advertisement for a furniture sale. Homeless man found dead in downtown alley, the headline read, and they did not even print his name. Just described him as a white male in his 50s, no identification found on his person. Cause of death presumed to be exposure to extreme cold. That was it. That was the sum total of Pete Garrison's obituary, a man who had fixed pipes and paid taxes and loved his wife and lived a whole entire life before the world decided he was disposable. The article mentioned that 3 other homeless individuals had died that same week across the city, bringing the season's total to 11. 11 people, frozen to death in a country that throws away enough food to feed entire nations, in a city with empty office buildings and heated parking garages and churches on every corner preaching about loving your neighbor. I kept that newspaper clipping for months, folded up in my coat pocket, until the paper turned soft and started falling apart along the creases. I wanted to remember the exact number, 11, because someone had to. A year has passed now, and I'm still here, still fighting the same war Pete lost. I found a spot in a transitional housing program last spring, a tiny room with a lock on the door and a radiator that clanks and hisses like an angry cat, but keeps me warm. I think about Pete every single day, especially when the temperature drops and I see the news reports about warming centers opening and donation drives collecting coats. The thing is, coats are not enough. Shelters are not enough. Not when there are more people than beds and the ones who get turned away have to flip a coin with their lives. What Pete needed What all of us need is for people to stop looking through us like we are ghosts, to stop treating homelessness like a personal failing instead of a systemic catastrophe. Pete did not die because he was weak or lazy or made bad choices. He died because a society that can afford to send rockets into space could not figure out how to keep a grieving old man from freezing to death 6 blocks from a heated shopping mall. I carry that truth with me now, carved into my chest like a scar that will never fully heal, and I share it with anyone willing to listen. Pete Garrison was my friend. He had a name, a history, a soul, and he deserved so much better than an unmarked grave in a frozen field at the edge of town. My car became my apartment on a rainy Wednesday in September, and I wish I could say it was dramatic or cinematic, but it wasn't. 6 months after graduating from Ohio State with a degree in communications, my apartment lease ended, and I had exactly $400 to my name. My roommate had moved to Seattle with her boyfriend, my temp job at the insurance company had dried up, and my parents, well, let's just say going back to their house in Akron wasn't an option after everything that happened. So, there I was, 24 years old with a journalism degree collecting dust, and my entire life crammed into the back seat of my 2009 Toyota Corolla. I had picked the McDonald's parking lot on Cedar Road in Beechwood because it stayed open late, had decent Wi-Fi that reached the parking lot, and the fluorescent lights made me feel slightly less alone. I told myself it would only be for a few weeks, just until I found something stable. That was 3 weeks ago, and I had developed a whole routine. Park in the same corner spot after 11, use the bathroom before they locked it, sleep with my pepper spray tucked between the driver's seat and the center console. That particular night was a Thursday in early October, and the temperature had dropped to maybe 45 degrees. I remember because I had layered 2 hoodies under my winter coat, and still woke up shivering around 2 in the morning. The parking lot was almost empty by then. Just my car, an old pickup truck near the drive-thru that had been there since before I arrived, and a white van parked way on the other end by the dumpsters. I had gotten used to sleeping light, waking up every time headlights swept across my windshield or someone walked too close to my car. But when I opened my eyes that night, something was different. The air inside the car felt wrong somehow, heavy and charged like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. I blinked a few times trying to adjust to the darkness, and that's when I saw it. A shape outside my driver's side window, not moving, not walking past, just standing there completely still, maybe 6 inches from the glass. My first instinct was to scream, but nothing came out. It was a man. I could tell that much from the silhouette. Tall, maybe 6 feet, wearing what looked like a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up. His face was pressed so close to the window that his breath was fogging up the glass in small, rhythmic clouds. I could see the outline of his nose, his forehead, the way his hands were cupped around his eyes like he was trying to peer inside a store window, like he was window shopping. For a few seconds that felt like hours. I just lay there frozen in my reclined seat, praying that he couldn't see me through the condensation that had built up on the inside of the windows. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure he could hear it. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. I just watched those little clouds of breath appear and disappear on the glass, over and over, while my mind raced through every possible scenario of what was about to happen. Then he moved to the back window. I heard his footsteps on the asphalt, slow, deliberate, unhurried, and watched his shadow drift past my peripheral vision until he stopped right behind me. The back seat was stuffed with everything I owned. Clothes in garbage bags, a small cooler, my laptop bag, a pillow and blanket that I used every night. He stood there for what must have been 2 full minutes, just looking at my things, and I realized with a sickening clarity that he knew. He knew someone was living in this car. He had probably been watching me for days, maybe weeks, learning my routine, figuring out when I was most vulnerable. The thought made my chest tighten so hard I thought I might pass out. I could hear him breathing now, or maybe I was imagining it. Every sound was amplified in that silence. The distant hum of the highway, a car door slamming somewhere far away, and underneath it all the soft shuffle of his shoes as he moved again. He came back to the driver's side. This time he didn't just look. I heard the click of the door handle being tested, a gentle pull at first, then harder. The whole car rocked slightly with the force of it. My locks were down. I always triple-checked before sleeping. But the sound of someone trying to get into your space, your only space in the entire world, is something that stays with you. He tried again, yanking now, and I could hear him grunt with the effort. Then his face appeared at the window once more, and this time he was closer, his features slightly visible in the orange glow of the parking lot lights. He looked normal. That was the worst part. Not some wild-eyed maniac, not obviously dangerous. Just a regular guy, maybe in his 40s, with a receding hairline and stubble on his chin. The kind of face you would pass in a grocery store without a second glance. He smiled at the window, and even though I knew he probably couldn't see me clearly, it felt like he was smiling directly at me. I don't know where the courage came from, but something in me snapped. Maybe it was the smile, or maybe it was the realization that if I didn't do something, I would just lie there paralyzed until he found a way in. I grabbed the pepper spray from beside my seat, sat up as fast as I could, and slammed my palm against the horn. The sound exploded through the empty parking lot like a bomb going off. The man stumbled backward, his face twisting from that calm smile into something like shock, and for a split second we just stared at each other through the glass. I kept my hand on the horn, the noise blaring, and with my other hand I held up the pepper spray so he could see it. I was screaming too, I think, though I don't remember what words came out. Probably nothing coherent. Just raw sound, all the fear and anger and helplessness of the past 3 weeks pouring out of me in one primal burst. He ran, not toward me, thank God, but away, cutting across the parking lot toward the white van by the dumpsters. I watched him go, still leaning on the horn, my whole body trembling so violently that my teeth were chattering. The van's headlights came on, and within seconds, it was peeling out of the lot, tires squealing against the pavement. I caught a glimpse of the license plate, partial, just the first 3 characters BKV, before it disappeared onto Cedar Road, heading east. Only then did I take my hand off the horn. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noise. My ears were ringing, my throat was raw, and I realized I was crying. Not soft tears, but the ugly kind. The kind where your whole face contorts and snot runs down your lip and you can't catch your breath. I sat there in the driver's seat, pepper spray still clutched in my fist, and I cried until I couldn't anymore. The McDonald's night manager came out about 5 minutes later. Her name was Brianna, a heavy-set black woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and a look on her face that was equal parts concern and annoyance. She had heard the horn from inside and wanted to know what the hell was going on. Tried to explain through my hiccups and shaky breath. The man, the window, the door handle. And I watched her expression shift from irritation to something softer, something like pity. She asked if I was living in my car, and I couldn't lie. Not in that moment. I just nodded. She didn't say anything judgmental, didn't tell me I couldn't park there anymore, didn't give me a lecture about making better choices. She just handed me a cup of hot coffee through my cracked window and told me she was calling the police. I wanted to hug her. I also wanted to disappear into the seat cushions and never be seen again. The police arrived about 20 minutes later, 2 officers in a Beechwood cruiser. A younger guy with a buzz cut and an older woman with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. They took my statement in the parking lot while Brianna watched from the doorway, arms crossed against the cold. I told them everything. The man, the hoodie, the way he had pressed his face to the glass, the partial plate number. The younger cop wrote it all down in a little notebook while the older one walked around my car with a flashlight, checking for any signs of tampering. She found smudges on the driver's side window where his face had been, and greasy fingerprints around the door handle. They took photos. The whole time, I could feel them looking at my car differently, seeing the garbage bags of clothes, the pillow in the back seat, the empty fast food wrappers I hadn't had a chance to throw away. I knew what they were thinking. I had seen that look before, from people at gas stations and rest stops, the look that says, "How did you end up like this?" without actually asking the question. The older officer, whose name tag read Sergeant Kimball, asked me how long I had been sleeping in the parking lot. I told her 3 weeks. She asked if I had anywhere else to go, any family or friends who could take me in. I said no, which was mostly true. She didn't push. Instead, she gave me a card for a women's shelter about 15 minutes away and told me that what happened tonight could have ended very differently. She wasn't being cruel about it, just matter of fact, but her words hit me like a punch to the chest. I knew she was right. If my doors hadn't been locked, if I hadn't woken up when I did, if I hadn't had the pepper spray within reach, the possibilities unfolded in my mind like a horror movie I couldn't turn off. The younger cop said they would put out an alert for the white van, but his tone suggested he didn't expect much to come of it. Partial plates, dark parking lot, no witnesses besides me. I understood. I wasn't naive enough to think they would catch him. After the police left, Brianna let me come inside to use the bathroom and wash my face. The fluorescent lights in there were brutal, and when I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. My eyes were swollen and red, my skin pale and blotchy, my hair a tangled mess from sleeping on it wrong. I looked like someone who had been living in a car for 3 weeks, which I guess made sense. I splashed cold water on my face and tried to pull myself together, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face at the window, that ordinary face with that terrible smile. Brianna was waiting for me when I came out, holding a bag with 2 cheeseburgers and a large fry. "On the house," she said. I started crying again, which was embarrassing, but she just patted my shoulder and told me to take care of myself. She said she had a daughter about my age, and the thought of her being out there alone in a parking lot made her sick to her stomach. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just thanked her and went back to my car. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I drove to a different parking lot, a Walmart about 10 miles away, and sat there with my doors locked and my pepper spray in my lap until the sun came up. Every van that passed made my heart race. Every person who walked too close to my car sent me into a spiral of panic. When morning finally came, I called the shelter that Sergeant Kimball had mentioned. They had a bed available, and I took it. I stayed there for 6 weeks, long enough to save up for a deposit on a tiny studio apartment in Cleveland Heights, long enough to get a job at a call center that paid barely above minimum wage, but at least paid something. I never went back to that McDonald's. I never saw the man in the white van again, though sometimes I wonder if he found someone else, someone whose doors weren't locked, someone who didn't wake up in time. That thought keeps me up at night more than any memory of his face at my window. I got lucky. I know that now. And I hate that luck is what it takes to survive when you have nothing and nowhere to go. Running away from home felt like freedom for about 3 days. After that, it just felt like being hungry and cold and scared all the time. I was 17, a junior who should have been worrying about SATs and prom dates, but instead I found myself sleeping on a bench in Riverside Park with a bunch of guys who had been living on the streets for years. My parents and I had been fighting constantly since my dad lost his job, and one night after a screaming match about my grades, I just packed a backpack and left. I thought I was making some kind of statement. I thought they would come looking for me, beg me to come back. Nobody came. I had $40 in my pocket when I left, and by the 4th day, I had nothing. Pride is a stupid thing when your stomach is eating itself. The group I fell in with was mostly harmless. There was an older guy everyone called Patches because of his jacket, and a woman named Rita, who talked to herself but always shared her food when she had some. A younger guy, maybe mid-20s, named Scotty, who had bad teeth and a nervous laugh. And then there was Carl. Carl was different from the others. He was quiet, kept to himself, and the other homeless people seemed to avoid him. He was maybe 50, with a gray beard and these watery blue eyes that never seemed to focus on anything. He had a shopping cart full of stuff he guarded like it was gold, and he slept on the far end of our little camp, away from everyone else. The others whispered that Carl had money hidden somewhere, that he was sitting on a small fortune but was too crazy to spend it. I never believed that. But I did notice that Carl always had food, snacks, granola bars, sometimes even sandwiches. And on the 5th night, when I had not eaten anything in almost 2 days, I could not stop staring at his cart. It was around 2 in the morning when I made my decision. Everyone was asleep, or at least pretending to be. The park was dead quiet except for the occasional car passing on the street beyond the trees. I'd been lying on my bench for hours, unable to sleep because my stomach kept cramping up. The hunger was not like anything I had experienced before. It was not just discomfort anymore. It was pain, real pain, like something was clawing at my insides. I watched Carl sleeping near his cart, wrapped in a dirty sleeping bag, and I told myself it was just a candy bar. Just one candy bar. He had plenty. He would not even notice. I got up slowly, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and I crept over to his cart. My hands found a Snickers bar near the top of one of his plastic bags. I grabbed it and went back to my bench. The whole thing took maybe 15 seconds. I ate that candy bar in 3 bites, barely even tasting it, just shoving it into my mouth like an animal. The next morning started like any other. People waking up slowly, shuffling around, Rita mumbling her usual nonsense while she folded her blankets. I was still hungry, but the edge was off and I felt something close to relief. That relief lasted about 20 minutes. That was when Carl woke up and started going through his cart. I watched him from across the camp, pretending to be busy with my backpack, but I could see everything. He was counting his things, checking his bags, and then he stopped. His whole body went stiff. He checked again, more frantically this time, digging through the plastic bags and pulling things out. Then he stood up and looked around the camp with those watery eyes, and for a second I thought he was looking right at me. My chest got tight. But his gaze moved past me and landed on Scotty, who was sitting on a milk crate about 10 feet away from Carl's cart, closer than anyone else. Scotty had no idea what was happening. He was just sitting there, picking at his fingernails, not paying attention to anything. Carl walked over to Scotty with this slow, deliberate pace that made my stomach turn. He stopped right in front of him and just stood there for a moment, staring down. Scotty looked up with that nervous smile of his, the one that showed his bad teeth, and said something like, "Hey man, what's up?" Carl did not answer. He just asked, real quiet, where his stuff was. Scotty looked confused. He said he did not know what Carl was talking about. Carl asked again, louder this time, and I could hear the edge in his voice. He said someone took food from his cart, and Scotty was sleeping right next to it. Scotty started shaking his head, saying it was not him. He did not take anything. He would never do that. But Carl was not listening. The other people in the camp were starting to pay attention now. Patches stood up from his spot near the fountain, watching. Rita stopped her mumbling. Everyone was looking at Carl and Scotty, and I was just sitting there on my bench, frozen, with the taste of that Snickers bar still in my mouth. I should have said something. That is what I tell myself now, years later. I should have stood up and admitted what I did, but I was 17 and scared and stupid, and I just sat there watching it unfold like it was happening on a television screen. Carl grabbed Scotty by the front of his jacket and yanked him off the milk crate. Scotty was smaller than Carl, skinnier, weaker. He tried to pull away, but Carl had him good. He kept saying it was not him, please, it was not him. But Carl just kept asking where his stuff was, over and over, getting louder each time. Then Carl threw the first punch. It caught Scotty right in the face, and I heard this sound, this wet smacking sound that I can still hear when I close my eyes at night. Scotty went down hard, and Carl got on top of him. The other homeless people just watched. Nobody moved to help. Nobody said anything. I think they were all scared of Carl, or maybe they just did not want to get involved. Either way, they just stood there, and so did I. What happened next is something I have never been able to fully describe to anyone. Carl beat Scotty for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few minutes. He punched him in the face, in the ribs, in the stomach. Scotty tried to cover himself, curling up into a ball on the ground, but Carl just kept going. At some point, Scotty stopped making sounds. He stopped trying to protect himself. His arms just fell to his sides and he lay there, and Carl kept hitting him. I remember the sounds more than anything else. The dull thud of fists on flesh. Carl breathing heavy, grunting with each swing. And this horrible gurgling noise coming from Scotty, like he was trying to breathe through liquid. I wanted to scream, to run, to do something, but my body would not move. It was like my feet were nailed to the ground. I just stood there watching a man get beaten half to death because I stole a candy bar, because I was hungry and selfish and too much of a coward to speak up. Carl finally stopped when he ran out of energy. He was panting, his knuckles bloody, and he just stood over Scotty for a long moment staring down at what he had done. Then he spit on him and walked back to his cart like nothing happened. Scotty was not moving. His face was unrecognizable, swollen and bloody, and there was this dark puddle forming under his head on the concrete. Rita started crying, these quiet little sobs that sounded more like hiccups. Patches pulled out an old flip phone and said he was calling an ambulance. Carl just sat down by his cart and started eating a granola bar, calm as anything, like he had just finished doing some light exercise. Nobody looked at me. Nobody suspected the skinny teenager who had only been there a few days. Why would they? I was just some runaway kid. Scotty was the one who slept closest to Carl's cart. It made sense that it was him. Except, it was not him. It was me. And Scotty was lying on the ground, maybe dying because of me. The ambulance took almost 20 minutes to arrive. 20 minutes of me sitting on that bench, staring at Scotty's body, waiting for him to move or make a sound or do anything that would tell me he was still alive. He did not move. His chest was rising and falling, but barely, and the blood kept spreading under his head. When the paramedics finally showed up, they worked on him for a long time before loading him onto a stretcher. One of them asked what happened, and Patches just said there was a fight, some dispute over stolen property. The paramedic looked around at all of us, these dirty homeless people standing in a city park at 7 in the morning, and I could see the judgment in his eyes. He did not ask any more questions. The cops came a little while later, 2 officers who took statements from Patches and Rita, but did not seem too interested in investigating further. Carl had already disappeared by then, slipped away with his cart while everyone was focused on Scotty. One of the cops asked me if I saw anything, and I said I was asleep when it started. I lied right to his face. He wrote something in his little notebook and walked away, and that was it. Nobody was going to look too hard into a fight between homeless guys in a park. I left the camp about an hour after the cops drove off. I did not say goodbye to anyone. I just grabbed my backpack and started walking, no destination in mind, just needing to move, to get away from that spot where Scotty's blood was still drying on the concrete. I walked for hours through the city, past shops and restaurants and normal people living their normal lives, and I kept thinking about what I had done. Not just the stealing, but the silence, the cowardice. I had watched an innocent man get beaten almost to death, and I had said nothing. I had lied to the police. I was complicit in something terrible, and there was no way to undo it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Scotty's face, the way it looked before and the way it looked after, and I heard that gurgling sound he made when he stopped being able to breathe right. I found a payphone around noon. I do not even know why I stopped there. My feet just carried me to it, and before I knew what I was doing, I was dialing my home number. My mom answered on the second ring. She did not yell at me. That was the thing that broke me. I expected screaming, anger, all the things we had been throwing at each other for months. Instead, her voice cracked and she just said my name over and over, like She could not believe it was really me. She asked where I was, if I was okay, if I was hurt. I could hear my dad in the background asking who was on the phone, and then I heard him make this sound when she told him it was me. This choked, desperate sound that I had never heard him make before. I told them where I was, some intersection downtown that I barely recognized, and my mom said they were coming to get me. Just stay there. Do not move. They were coming. I hung up and sat down on the curb and I started crying. Not quiet crying either, but ugly, loud sobbing that made people on the street stare at me as they walked past. I cried for Scotty, who might have been dead by then for all I knew. I cried for myself, for how stupid and selfish I had been. I cried because my parents still loved me even after everything, and I did not deserve it. My dad's truck pulled up about 40 minutes later, and when he got out and saw me sitting there on that curb, dirty and skinny and broken, he did not say a word. He just walked over and hugged me so hard I thought my ribs would crack. I never told them what really happened in that park. I never told anyone until now. I said I had been sleeping rough, that it was hard, that I wanted to come home. All of that was true, just not the whole truth. I went back to school, finished my junior year, graduated the next spring. I went to community college, got a job, built something like a normal life. But I never stopped thinking about Scotty. I looked for news about him for months afterward, searched online for any reports about a homeless man beaten in Riverside Park, but I never found anything. I do not know if he lived or died. I do not know if Carl was ever caught. That uncertainty is its own kind of punishment, I think. Some nights I still dream about it. I am back on that bench, watching Carl walk towards Scotty, and I open my mouth to say it was me. I took it. Leave him alone. But no sound comes out. I just sit there, silent, while it happens all over again. I am 24 now, and I have not stolen anything since that morning. Not a candy bar, not a pen, not anything. It does not make up for what I did. Nothing ever will. But it is the only promise I know how to keep. November can be cruel in Portland, Oregon, and that year it arrived with a vengeance that cut right through whatever layers you managed to pile on. My high school class had graduated back in 2009, and while most of them were building careers and families, I had been sleeping under bridges and in parking garages for the better part of 3 years. A bad divorce, a worse drinking problem, and a series of choices I still regret led me to lose my job as a warehouse supervisor, and eventually my apartment. By the time that particular Friday night rolled around, I had learned the rhythm of street survival pretty well. You find your spots, you learn which shelters have beds and which ones are just trouble, and most importantly, you find your people. That night, I was heading toward an abandoned lot off Burnside, where a group of us had been gathering for weeks. It was hidden behind a crumbling brick building that used to be a print shop, shielded from the main road by overgrown bushes and a chain-link fence with a convenient hole near the back corner. When I squeezed through that gap in the fence around 8 in the evening, there were already 5 others huddled around a rusted oil barrel that Jerome had dragged there a month before. Jerome was a Vietnam vet, probably in his late 60s, with a gray beard that reached his chest and eyes that had seen too much of everything. He had this way of keeping things calm in the group, a quiet authority that came from experience rather than intimidation. Next to him sat a woman everyone called Birdie, because she was always feeding the pigeons with whatever bread scraps she could find. There was also Tommy, a skinny kid who could not have been older than 22, running from something he never talked about, and the Pratt brothers, Lenny and Gus, who had been homeless together since their mother died and left them with nothing but debt. The fire inside that barrel was the only warm thing for blocks, and we guarded it like it was sacred. That night started out like any other. We passed around a bottle of cheap whiskey that Gus had managed to get from somewhere, and Jerome told one of his stories about his time in Da Nang. Birdie hummed to herself while she sorted through a plastic bag full of things she had collected throughout the day, little treasures that meant nothing to anyone else but everything to her. I had managed to score a pretty decent haul from the dumpster behind a grocery store on Hawthorne. A few bruised apples, half a loaf of bread that was only slightly stale, and 2 cans of beans that were dented but still sealed. I shared what I had because that was how things worked with us. You gave when you could and took when you needed. No questions asked and no debts kept. The fire crackled and popped inside the barrel, sending little sparks up into the black sky, and for a moment it almost felt peaceful. The temperature had dropped to somewhere around 30 degrees, and you could see your breath forming thick clouds every time you exhaled. We all stayed close to that barrel, shoulders nearly touching, drawing whatever warmth we could from the flames and from each other. The trouble walked through that hole in the fence around 10:30, wearing a torn army jacket and carrying a backpack that looked stuffed to bursting. His name was Ray Durkin, and everybody on the streets knew to stay clear of him. He was maybe 45, built like a man who had done time and used every minute of it in the prison yard, with a shaved head covered in poorly done tattoos and a scar that ran from his left eyebrow down to his jaw. Ray had a reputation for violence that was well earned. I had seen him break a man's arm over a sleeping spot near the Willamette River 2 winters ago, and the sound of that bone snapping still visited me in my sleep sometimes. He walked into our circle like he owned the place, dropped his backpack on the ground with a heavy thud, and immediately started warming his hands over our fire without so much as a nod to anyone. Jerome tensed up beside me, and I noticed Tommy slowly inching backward into the shadows. Even Lenny, who was usually quick with a joke or a comment, went completely silent. For a while, nobody said anything. We just sat there in that uncomfortable quiet, the fire crackling between us, Ray standing on the opposite side of the barrel with his eyes scanning each of us like he was sizing up prey. Jerome finally broke the silence by offering Ray a pull from the whiskey bottle, a peace gesture that I had seen him use before to diffuse tense situations. Ray snatched it without a word, took 3 long gulps, and then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He did not offer it back. Instead, he set it down on the ground next to his backpack and started rummaging through his things, pulling out a filthy sleeping bag and a tarp that looked like it had been dragged through mud. Birdie kept her head down, her fingers still moving nervously through her plastic bag, and I could hear her breathing getting faster. I wanted to say something, to tell Ray that there were other spots he could use, but I knew better than to put a target on myself. So I just sat there, my jaw tight, watching him settle in like a storm cloud that had decided to park itself right in the middle of our little haven. The argument started about an hour later, and it came out of nowhere like a punch you do not see coming. Gus had been getting more and more agitated as the night wore on, whispering things to Lenny that I could not quite catch. At some point, Ray must have heard something because his head snapped toward the brothers and his face went hard as concrete. He stood up slowly, and even though the fire was between them, I could feel the heat of his anger radiating stronger than any flame. He pointed a thick finger at Gus and asked him where his jacket was, the army jacket he was wearing. Gus stammered something about finding it, that he had pulled it from a donation bin outside a church on Glisson Street 3 weeks ago. But Ray was not having it. He crossed around the barrel in 4 quick steps and grabbed Gus by the collar of that jacket, lifting him halfway off the ground like he weighed nothing. That jacket was his, Ray said through clenched teeth, stolen from his camp 2 months back when he was doing a stint in county lockup for assault. Whether it was true or not, I could not say, but in that moment, it did not matter. The truth rarely matters when a violent man decides he has been wronged. Lenny jumped up to defend his brother, which was exactly the wrong thing to do. He shoved Ray hard in the chest, trying to break his grip on Gus, and for a second, it actually worked. Ray stumbled back a step, releasing Gus, who fell to the ground, gasping and clutching at his throat. But then Ray's face changed into something I can only describe as empty, like a switch had been flipped, and whatever humanity was behind those eyes just turned off. He came at Lenny with a fury that was terrifying to witness, throwing punches that connected with wet, heavy sounds against flesh and bone. Jerome tried to intervene, grabbing Ray's arm from behind, but Ray spun around and caught him in the temple with an elbow that sent the old man sprawling into the dirt. Birdie was screaming now. this high-pitched wail that seemed to echo off the brick walls surrounding us. I was on my feet, but my legs would not move, stuck somewhere between the instinct to help and the instinct to survive. Tommy had already disappeared through the hole in the fence. Smart kid. The whole scene unfolded in what felt like slow motion, but was probably only 15 or 20 seconds of pure chaos. That was when it happened. Ray had Lenny pinned against the ground, still swinging even though Lenny had stopped fighting back, and Gus came at him from behind with a piece of broken concrete he had grabbed from somewhere. He brought it down hard on Ray's shoulder, not his head, just his shoulder, but it was enough to make Ray howl in pain and roll off his brother. Ray scrambled to his feet, his face twisted with rage, and he lunged toward the oil barrel. I thought he was trying to grab something to use as a weapon, maybe one of the pieces of scrap wood we had been feeding the fire with, but instead, he just shoved the whole thing over in one violent motion, like he wanted to burn the whole world down if he could not win the fight. The barrel tipped with a horrible metallic screech, and the burning wood and embers inside spilled out across the dry weeds and trash that covered the ground of that lot. For a moment, we all just stood there, frozen, watching those little flames catch and spread like living things searching for something to devour. The fire moved faster than I ever thought possible. One second it was just a few patches of burning weeds, and the next it was a wall of orange and yellow racing across the lot toward the old print shop building. The dry autumn had turned everything into kindling, the dead grass, the piles of cardboard we used for bedding, the wooden pallets stacked against the fence. All of it went up like it had been soaked in gasoline. The heat hit me in a wave that made me stagger backward, and the smoke came right after, thick and black and choking. I heard Bertie coughing somewhere to my left, and I reached out blindly, grabbed her arm and started pulling her toward the hole in the fence. Jerome was already on his feet, blood running down the side of his face from where Ray had elbowed him, and he was yelling at the Pratt brothers to move, but Lenny was not moving. He was still on the ground where Ray had left him, curled up on his side, and Gus was trying to drag him away from the flames that were creeping closer with every passing second. Ray had vanished, slipped away into the smoke and the night like the coward he was, leaving the rest of us to deal with the nightmare he had created. I got Bertie to the fence and practically shoved her through the hole, screaming at her to run and not look back. Then I turned around and ran back into that hellscape because I could not leave the others behind. The smoke was so thick now that I could barely see 3 feet in front of me, and the heat was unbearable, pressing against my skin like a physical weight. I found Jerome first, stumbling in the wrong direction, disoriented from the blow to his head. I grabbed his arm and pointed him toward the fence, told him to follow the brick wall and he would find the gap. Then I went looking for Gus and Lenny. I found them near the center of the lot, surrounded by flames on 3 sides. Gus had managed to get Lenny sitting up, but Lenny's face was a mess of blood and swelling, and one of his eyes was completely shut. His left arm hung at an angle that made my stomach turn, clearly broken in at least one place. The fire had reached a pile of old tires near the edge of the lot, and the flames shooting up from that were like something out of a horror movie, black smoke billowing up in a column that blocked out the stars above us. I knew we had maybe 30 seconds before our only escape route was cut off. I grabbed Lenny's good arm and threw it over my shoulder while Gus took the other side, and together we half carried, half dragged him toward the fence. Lenny was screaming with every step, this raw animal sound that I still hear sometimes when the night gets too quiet. The fire was roaring now, an actual roar like some giant beast breathing down our necks, and I could feel the hair on my arms singeing from the heat. Sparks were raining down on us like burning snow, landing on our clothes, our skin, leaving little stinging kisses that we did not have time to acknowledge. We reached the fence just as the flames engulfed the spot where we had been standing moments before. I pushed Lenny through the hole first, as gently as I could manage, which was not very gentle at all, and Gus scrambled through after him. I was the last one out, and as I squeezed through that gap in the chain link, I felt the metal hot against my palms, heated by the inferno just feet away. We collapsed on the sidewalk on the other side, all of us gasping and coughing, our lungs full of smoke and our eyes streaming tears. Behind us, the entire lot was ablaze, flames reaching up toward the sky like fingers trying to grab the moon. Someone in one of the nearby buildings must have called the fire department because I could hear sirens in the distance getting closer. That sound triggered something primal in all of us. Jerome looked at me with those tired, bloodshot eyes and just shook his head slowly before limping off into the darkness between buildings. Bertie was already gone, disappeared the moment she had cleared the fence. Gus looked at his brother, looked at me, and I saw the impossible choice playing out across his face. If we stayed, the paramedics would help Lenny, but the police would come too. Warrants, questions, the system that had failed every single one of us in different ways would swallow us whole again. But if we ran, Lenny might not make it through the night with those injuries. I made the decision for him. I told Gus to take his brother and go, that I would stay and flag down the ambulance, give them a fake name, tell them I found Lenny like this on the street. Gus hesitated for just a second, then nodded and started dragging Lenny away from the growing glow of the fire. I sat down on that cold sidewalk and waited for the red and blue lights to arrive, rehearsing my lie, trying to stop my whole body from shaking as the adrenaline drained away and left nothing but exhaustion and a sadness so heavy I could barely breathe. The paramedics found me sitting there about 5 minutes later, covered in soot and smelling like a chimney. I told them exactly what I had planned, that I was walking by and found an injured man on the sidewalk, that I had no idea what happened to him. They did not believe me. I could see it in their eyes, but they also did not care enough to press. They had a patient to stabilize and a fire to stay clear of, and some homeless guy's story was the least of their concerns. The firefighters arrived right after, 3 trucks that lit up the whole block with their flashing lights, and they got to work on the blaze that had now spread to the old print shop. I watched from across the street as they battled it for nearly 2 hours, eventually bringing it under control, but not before the building was gutted completely. A police officer took my statement, wrote down the fake name I gave him, and told me I was free to go. I walked away from that scene with nothing but the burned clothes on my back and lungs that would ache for weeks afterward. I found out later that Lenny survived. Gus got him to a clinic on the east side run by volunteers who did not ask questions, and they patched him up well enough. His arm healed crooked and he lost most of the vision in his left eye, but he lived. That was more than I expected when I saw him lying in that burning lot. I never saw Ray Durkin again after that night, though I heard rumors over the years. Some said he got picked up on a 3rd strike charge and was doing 25 to life somewhere in California. Others said he froze to death under an overpass in Seattle during a cold snap. I like to believe the second one, if I am being truthful, because it feels like some kind of justice, even though I know that is a dark thing to wish on another person. The rest of our little group scattered after the fire. Jerome moved south, said the cold was getting too hard on his bones. Bertie ended up in a women's shelter and last I heard actually got into a transitional housing program. Tommy I never saw again, just vanished like he was never there at all. As for me, that night changed something inside my chest, cracked something open that had been sealed shut for a long time. I checked myself into a detox program 3 weeks later, got clean, got a job washing dishes at a restaurant downtown, and slowly started climbing back towards something resembling a life. I still think about that night whenever November rolls around and the air gets that particular kind of cold. I think about how fast everything can fall apart, how a single act of violence can destroy the fragile peace that people build when they have nothing else. And I think about Jerome passing that whiskey bottle to Ray, trying to keep the peace, not knowing that some fires are already burning long before the first spark ever catches. Sleeping under a bridge in March will make you do things you swore you would never do. I had been homeless in Columbus, Ohio for about 4 months when that night happened, and by then I had already broken most of my own rules just to survive. Before the streets, I worked at a warehouse, had roommates, paid bills on time. Then everything fell apart in a matter of weeks. The warehouse shut down, I got pneumonia, my roommates left, and my landlord started eviction proceedings while I was still coughing up mucus in a free clinic waiting room. My mom died when I was 19, and I never knew my father, so there was no safety net waiting for me. The friends I had from high school were scattered across different states, living their own lives, and I was too ashamed to reach out and admit what had happened to me. Being a woman on the streets teaches you things fast. You learn to trust your gut, to avoid certain areas after dark, to never let anyone know where you sleep. I met him on a Thursday evening outside a coffee shop on High Street. It was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes your teeth ache. I was sitting on the sidewalk, my back against the brick wall, hoping someone might buy me a hot drink or drop some change. He came out of the shop holding 2 cups and offered me one without a word. Medium build, maybe early 40s, clean-shaven, wearing a gray wool coat that looked expensive. His name was Gary, he said, and he volunteered at a shelter downtown sometimes. We talked for maybe 10 minutes, just normal conversation. The weather, how hard the winter had been, how the city should do more for people like me. He had this calm, gentle way of speaking, like a therapist or a pastor. When he offered me $50 and a warm place to sleep for the night, no strings attached, I wanted to say no. Every instinct I had developed on the streets told me to refuse. But I was exhausted, freezing, and he seemed so sincere. I told myself I could handle whatever happened. I was wrong about that in ways I still have nightmares about. His car was a dark blue sedan, clean inside, smelling like pine air freshener. He drove carefully, obeying every speed limit, using his turn signals. We made small talk during the ride, and he asked me questions about myself, where I was from, how long I had been on the streets, if I had any family. I kept my answers vague, which he seemed to respect. He told me he lived alone, had been divorced for a few years, worked in insurance claims. Everything about him screamed ordinary. The drive took about 20 minutes, heading into a residential area I did not recognize. Lots of older houses set back from the road with big yards. His place was a 2-story house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. No neighbors within shouting distance. That detail registered in my mind, but I pushed it aside. He pulled into the garage and the door closed behind us automatically before we even got out of the car. I remember thinking that was a little strange, but I told myself rich people just had different habits. Inside, the house was neat, almost too neat. Everything looked like it belonged in a catalog. Matching furniture, no dust, no clutter, no personal photos on the walls. He gave me a quick tour of the first floor, living room, kitchen, a small bathroom. He pointed toward a hallway and mentioned that the basement was off limits because he used it for storage, and it was a mess. The way he said it, casual but firm, made me glance at the door. It had a heavy deadbolt on it, the kind you would see on an exterior door, not on a basement entrance. I noticed another door near the kitchen with the same type of lock. He caught me looking and smiled. Said he was paranoid about break-ins since his divorce. That explanation made sense on the surface, but something in my chest tightened. I had learned to pay attention to that feeling over the past months. It had kept me safe more than once. But I was inside now, warm for the first time in days, and I convinced myself I was overreacting. He offered me a shower and clean clothes, said his ex-wife had left some things behind that might fit me. The bathroom upstairs was spotless, white tiles, fluffy towels, expensive-looking soap. I locked the door and checked the lock twice before undressing. The hot water felt incredible, and I stayed under the spray longer than I should have, letting the warmth soak into my muscles. When I got out, I noticed there was no window in the bathroom. Just smooth drywall where a window should have been. The clothes he left outside the door were folded neatly. Sweatpants, a long-sleeve shirt, thick socks. They smelled like fabric softener. I put them on and came downstairs to find him in the kitchen, heating up soup on the stove. He had set the table with 2 bowls, 2 spoons, napkins, like we were old friends having dinner together. The soup was chicken noodle from a can, nothing fancy. He sat across from me and watched me eat with this expression I could not quite read. Not hungry, not impatient, just watching. I finished the bowl faster than I meant to, and he immediately offered me more. After dinner, he showed me the guest room where I would be sleeping. It was upstairs at the end of the hallway, with a single bed and a dresser and nothing else. No lamp, no nightstand, no decorations. The window had thick curtains drawn across it, and when I pulled them back slightly, I saw metal bars on the outside of the glass. Security bars, the kind people install in bad neighborhoods to prevent break-ins. But this was not a bad neighborhood, and every other house I had seen on the drive had normal windows. I asked him about it and he shrugged, said the previous owners must have installed them. He had just never bothered to remove them. His voice was calm, but his eyes stayed fixed on my face a beat too long. I told him I was tired and wanted to sleep. He nodded, wished me good night, and closed the door behind him. I waited until his footsteps faded down the hallway, then tried the door handle. It turned, the door opened. I exhaled. Maybe I really was just being paranoid. I left the door open a crack and lay down on the bed, still wearing my shoes. I must have dozed off because the next thing I remember is waking up to the sound of the door clicking shut. The room was dark, completely dark, and I could not see anything. I reached for my phone out of habit before remembering I had not had a working phone in months. I stayed perfectly still, listening. Footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, then silence. I slid off the bed as quietly as I could and moved toward the door. When I grabbed the handle and turned it, nothing happened. The door was locked from the outside. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I tried again, twisting the handle harder, pulling, pushing. Nothing. I pressed my ear against the wood and heard breathing on the other side, steady and patient, like someone waiting. I backed away from the door and stumbled into the dresser, knocking something to the floor. The breathing stopped. Then footsteps again, moving away down the hall. I stood there in the darkness, shaking, trying to figure out what to do next. I felt my way along the wall until I found the window. The curtains were heavy and I yanked them aside, letting in a sliver of light from somewhere outside. A street lamp maybe, or the moon. The bars on the window were solid, bolted into the frame from the outside. I pushed against them anyway, knowing it was useless. My eyes adjusted slowly and I started searching the room for anything I could use. The dresser was empty, every drawer bare. The bed had no frame, just a mattress on the floor. No closet, no objects, nothing. It was like a cell designed to look like a bedroom. I went back to the door and examined it more closely. The lock was a simple latch mechanism, the kind that could be opened with a flathead screwdriver or a butter knife. I did not have either, but I did have a zipper on my jacket, a metal one with teeth. I took the jacket off and tried to work the zipper pull into the gap between the door and the frame, aiming for the latch. My fingers were clumsy with fear, but I kept trying, scraping and pushing, for what felt like an hour. The latch finally gave with a small click that sounded impossibly loud in the silence. I froze, waiting for footsteps, waiting for him to come running. Nothing. I eased the door open inch by inch, holding my breath. The hallway was dark, but I could see a faint glow coming from downstairs. Maybe a television or a lamp left on. I stepped out of the room and immediately noticed another door across the hall, one I had not seen during the brief tour. It was slightly open, and through the gap I could see a desk covered in monitors, 4 or 5 of them, showing different angles of the house. The guest room, the bathroom, the kitchen, the garage. He had cameras everywhere. On one of the screens I saw myself, a grainy figure standing frozen in the hallway, and I realized he could be watching me right now from anywhere in the house. I forced myself to move, heading toward the stairs, staying close to the wall to avoid any creaky floorboards. Every step felt like a gamble. I made it to the top of the staircase and looked down into the living room below. Empty. The front door was maybe 30 feet away. I was halfway down the stairs when I heard his voice behind me, calm and almost friendly. He said my name, the fake name I had given him earlier, and asked where I was going. I did not turn around. I ran. I took the stairs 2 at a time, nearly tripping at the bottom, and sprinted for the front door. My hand hit the deadbolt and I twisted it, yanked the door open, and felt the cold night air on my face for one beautiful second before his hand closed around my arm and pulled me backward. I screamed, loud and raw, knowing there were no neighbors close enough to hear, but screaming anyway. He dragged me back into the living room and threw me onto the floor. He was stronger than he looked, much stronger, and his face had changed completely. That gentle, concerned expression was gone. His eyes were flat and empty, like he had switched something off inside himself. He stood over me and told me I should not have done that things could have been easy if I had just cooperated. He reached down to grab me again, and I did the only thing I could think of. I bit his hand as hard as I could, sinking my teeth into the flesh between his thumb and index finger until I tasted blood. He screamed and jerked back, and in that second I rolled sideways and got to my feet. There was a lamp on an end table near the couch, and I grabbed it without thinking, swinging it at his head as he lunged toward me. The base connected with his temple and he staggered, not falling but stumbling enough to give me a few seconds. I ran back toward the front door, but he had locked it again somehow. The deadbolt turned. The kitchen. I remembered the back door near the kitchen. I sprinted through the living room, knocking over a chair behind me to slow him down, and made it to the kitchen. The back door had a chain lock, a deadbolt, and a regular lock. My fingers fumbled with all three while I heard him coming, cursing and breathing heavy, his footsteps getting closer. The chain came off, the deadbolt turned, the regular lock clicked. I threw the door open and ran into the backyard, cold, wet grass under my feet, heading for the fence at the edge of the property. The fence was wooden, maybe 6 feet tall, and I hit it at full speed, grabbing the top and pulling myself up. I felt a hand close around my ankle, and I kicked backward as hard as I could, felt my heel connect with something solid. His grip loosened, and I hauled myself over the top, splinters digging into my palms, and dropped down the other side into an empty lot full of dead weeds and broken glass. I did not stop. I ran through the lot, across someone's driveway, down a street I did not recognize, just running until my lungs burned and my legs felt like they would collapse. I found a gas station about a mile away, the lights bright and welcoming, and I stumbled inside looking like a complete mess. Barefoot because I had lost my shoes somewhere, bleeding from my hands, crying and shaking. The woman behind the counter called the police. I told them everything. They went to the house, but Gary was gone. He had cleared out within hours, taken the monitors, taken anything that could identify him. The police said they would investigate, but I could tell from their faces they did not expect to find him. I spent 2 nights in a shelter after that, then got a bus ticket to another city. I never went back to Columbus. Nobody tells you how quiet the world gets after midnight when you sleep outside. My name is irrelevant now, but people used to call me Eddie back when I had a job installing drywall and a studio apartment in Tucson. That life ended somewhere between my second back surgery and the opioid prescription that insurance stopped covering. By the spring of 2024, my 36th birthday had come and gone without celebration, and I had been sleeping behind the recycling center on Conover Road for almost 8 months. I knew every shortcut in the city, every safe corner to rest, every business that would let me use their bathroom without hassle. I also knew which streets to avoid after dark, and that knowledge is what led me into that alley on the night everything changed. It was a Wednesday, I remember, because the shelter on 5th Avenue served hot soup on Wednesdays, and I had filled my stomach for the first time in 2 days. The Ridley Heights neighborhood had gotten bad over the past year. Drug deals happened openly on the corners, and 3 people had been shot there in the past month alone. I usually walked the long way around, adding 20 minutes to reach my sleeping spot, but that night my legs ached from walking all day looking for aluminum cans to recycle. The alley behind the old textile factory seemed like a reasonable compromise, a straight shot that would keep me off the main streets while cutting through the edge of the dangerous zone. I had used it maybe twice before without incident, The entrance sat between a shuttered pawn shop and a building that used to be a check-cashing place, both covered in graffiti and protected by rusty security gates. A single streetlight flickered at the far end, casting orange shadows that jumped and twitched against the brick walls. I pulled my jacket tighter, adjusted the backpack that held everything I owned, and stepped into the darkness with nothing but the sound of my own footsteps for company. The alley stretched longer than I remembered, maybe 200 yards of cracked asphalt littered with broken bottles and fast food wrappers. Dumpsters lined the left side, overflowing with garbage that nobody had collected in weeks. The smell hit me about 30 feet in, that sour combination of rotting food and stagnant water pooling in potholes that never drained properly. I kept my head down and walked with purpose, the way you learn to move when you live on the streets. You never want to look lost or vulnerable. You never want to seem like an easy target. Halfway through, I passed a shopping cart wedged against a chain-link fence, its wheels stripped and rusted solid. Someone had abandoned it there months ago, and now it served as a landmark of sorts, a sign that I had reached the midpoint. That fence separated the alley from an empty lot where the city had torn down an old warehouse 2 years back. They never built anything new, just left it as a flat expanse of weeds and concrete rubble. I was about 20 feet past the shopping cart when I heard it. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a cat in distress or a dog whimpering somewhere in the lot. The sound was muffled, distant, coming from the other side of the fence. I slowed my pace but kept walking, telling myself it was none of my business. In my world, curiosity gets you killed or beaten or robbed. You learn to keep your eyes forward and your mouth shut. But the sound came again, louder this time, and I recognized it for what it was. A human voice. Someone crying out, the sound cut short like a hand had covered their mouth. I stopped walking. My heart began to pound against my ribs and I felt the sweat break out on my forehead despite the cool night air. Every instinct screamed at me to keep moving, to pretend I heard nothing, to get out of that alley and never look back. But my feet would not obey. I crept toward the fence, staying close to the dumpsters where the shadows were thickest. The chain link had holes in several places, torn open by vandals or maybe by people like me looking for a shortcut. Through one of these gaps, I could see into the lot. The moon had emerged from behind the clouds, casting pale light across the weeds and broken concrete. At first, I saw nothing, just empty space and the skeletal remains of the warehouse foundation. Then movement caught my eye near the far corner, maybe 50 yards from where I stood. 2 figures. No, 3. One on the ground. 2 standing over them. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. One of the standing figures drew back his arm and swung something downward. The thud that followed was sickening, a wet, heavy sound that I had never heard before but understood immediately. The figure on the ground jerked and then went still. The other standing figure laughed, a short bark of amusement that echoed across the empty lot and reached my ears with terrible clarity. My body reacted before my mind could process what I had witnessed. I pressed myself flat against the dumpster, making myself as small as possible. Through the gap in the fence, I watched the 2 men step back from the motionless form on the ground. One was tall and heavy-set, wearing a dark hoodie with the sleeves pushed up to his elbows. The other was shorter, wiry, with a shaved head that gleamed in the moonlight. The tall one held something in his hand, a pipe or a bat. I could not tell which from that distance. He wiped it on his jeans and said something to his companion that I could not hear. The shorter man nodded and pulled out his phone, the screen lighting up his face with a ghostly blue glow. They seemed casual, unhurried, like they had all the time in the world. Like what they had just done was nothing more than a minor errand. The person on the ground had not moved since that final blow, and I knew with horrible certainty that I was looking at a body. I wanted to scream. I wanted to charge through that fence and tackle those men and somehow save whoever lay bleeding in the weeds. But I am not a hero. I am a 53-year-old man with a bad back and malnutrition and no weapon except a dull pocket knife I use to open cans. Those 2 would have killed me without breaking a sweat, and then there would be 2 bodies in that lot instead of 1. So I did the only thing I could do. I made myself breathe slowly, silently, fighting the urge to gasp for air. I counted to 10 in my head, then 20, waiting for them to leave. The tall one lit a cigarette, the flame from his lighter briefly illuminating a face with a crooked nose and a thick beard. He took a long drag and blew smoke toward the sky, completely relaxed. The shorter one finished whatever he was doing on his phone and shoved it back in his pocket. They exchanged a few more words, glanced down at the body one final time, and then began walking toward the opposite end of the lot where a gap in the perimeter fence led out to Dexter Street. I waited until they disappeared into the shadows on the far side. Then I waited another full minute, counting the seconds in my head, terrified that they might come back, or that one of them had spotted me somehow. When I finally moved, my legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I stumbled backward, away from the fence, my eyes still fixed on the dark shape lying motionless in the lot. Part of me wanted to go to them, to check if they were still alive, to do something. But a larger part understood that every second I stayed was a second wasted. Those men could return at any moment, or someone else might come along, find me near a body, and assume the worst. I knew how this worked. I knew who the cops would believe and who they would arrest. A homeless man covered in dirt, crouching near a murder victim in the middle of the night. I would spend the rest of my life in prison for a crime I did not commit. The only way to help was to find someone with a phone, someone who could call the police and send them to this exact spot before it was too late, if it was not too late already. I ran. Not the careful, measured walk I had learned to use on the streets, but a full desperate sprint toward the end of the alley. My backpack slammed against my spine with every step. My lungs burned from years of cigarettes and sleeping in cold air. I burst out onto Fremont Boulevard and looked wildly in both directions, searching for anyone. A car, a pedestrian, an open business. The street was empty. Shuttered storefronts lined both sides, their windows dark and protected by metal grates. I kept running, my boots pounding against the sidewalk until I spotted the glow of fluorescent lights half a block ahead. A 24-hour laundromat, the kind of place that stays open all night for shift workers and insomniacs. I crashed through the door so hard that the little bell above it nearly ripped from its mount. Inside, a woman in her 60s sat folding towels at one of the plastic tables. She looked up at me with wide eyes, her hands frozen mid-fold, and I realized how I must have appeared. Wild-eyed, sweating, gasping for breath, a homeless man bursting in like a lunatic in the middle of the night. I tried to speak, but the words came out in fragments. Someone hurt. In the lot. Behind the factory. "Call the police, please." The woman stared at me for what felt like an eternity, her expression caught somewhere between fear and confusion. I thought she might scream or run or tell me to get out, but something in my face must have convinced her, because she slowly reached into her purse and pulled out a cell phone. Her name was Maxine, I learned later, and she had worked the night shift at a packaging plant for 30 years before retiring. She dialed 911 with steady fingers while I leaned against a washing machine and tried not to collapse. I heard her describe the location, repeat it when the dispatcher asked for clarification, then hand the phone to me. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, asking questions I struggled to answer. How many attackers? What did they look like? Was the victim still breathing? I told them everything I could remember. The tall one with the beard, the short one with the shaved head, the weapon that might have been a pipe or a bat. I told them the men had walked toward Dexter Street. I told them to hurry, please hurry, because someone was dying in that empty lot while we stood here talking. The police arrived at the laundromat 14 minutes after the call. I know because I watched the clock on the wall the entire time, each minute stretching into something unbearable. 2 officers took my statement while Maxine made instant coffee in styrofoam cups and handed them out like we were at some grim midnight gathering. They asked me the same questions the dispatcher had asked, then asked them again in different ways, looking for inconsistencies. I understood. I was a witness without an address, without identification, without anything to prove I was telling the truth. One of the officers drove me back to the lot in his patrol car. More police had already arrived, their red and blue lights painting the surrounding buildings in pulsing color. Yellow tape stretched across the gap in the fence. I watched from the back seat as paramedics emerged from the lot carrying a stretcher. The body on it was covered with a white sheet. Nobody was rushing. Nobody was performing CPR or shouting orders. They moved with the slow, deliberate pace of people who had arrived too late. The officer beside me said something, maybe an attempt at comfort, but I did not hear the words. All I could think about was the sound of that final blow, the wet thud that would echo in my skull for years to come. They found the two men 3 days later. Someone had talked, a girlfriend or a neighbor, or maybe just someone who wanted the reward money that the victim's family had posted. The tall one's name was Carl Denning, 41 years old, 3 prior convictions for assault. The shorter one was his cousin, a 26-year-old named Ricky Slade, who had been in and out of county jail since he turned 18. The victim was a 23-year-old college student named James Okonkwo, who had been walking home from his job at a warehouse. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong neighborhood. The detectives told me that my description helped narrow down the suspects, that my willingness to come forward made a difference. But it did not feel like a difference. James Okonkwo was still dead. His mother still had to identify his body. His friends still had to bury him. I did what I could, and it was not enough. And I have carried that weight every single day since. Some nights I still wake up in whatever doorway or shelter bed I have found, gasping for air, hearing that laugh echo across an empty lot. I tell myself I made the right choice. I tell myself that going in there would have just gotten me killed too. But the truth is, I will never know if I could have saved him. I will never know if 30 seconds of courage might have changed everything. And that uncertainty, that permanent maybe, is the thing that haunts me more than anything those two men could have done to my body. At that point in my life, I was staying at a women's shelter on the edge of town, trying to keep my days structured so I didn't spiral. Mornings were about lining up early, keeping my clothes clean, and checking the bulletin board for anything that paid cash. That day started the same way, with weak coffee and the smell of disinfectant clinging to everything I owned. I headed out before sunrise toward a day labor pickup spot near an old gas station where contractors sometimes showed up. Most days you waited for hours and went home empty-handed, but hope had a way of making you stand there anyway. I kept telling myself I just needed one small break to get back on my feet. Rent deposits, bus passes, and cheap motels all felt impossibly far away. That morning felt ordinary enough to be forgettable. I didn't realize how carefully I would remember every detail later. While we were waiting, a man parked across the street and watched the line for a while without getting out. He looked clean, well-fed, and out of place compared to the rest of us. After a few minutes, he walked over and said he needed help cleaning a house he was preparing to sell. He spoke calmly, said it would only take a few hours, and promised cash at the end of the day. No paperwork, no questions, just simple cleaning. He looked directly at me when he spoke, like he had already decided. I hesitated, but the others were already shaking their heads or backing away. Something about how quickly he singled me out should have mattered more. Instead, I focused on the idea of money in my pocket by nightfall. I agreed before I gave myself time to talk out of it. The drive didn't take long, but the scenery changed faster than I expected. Houses thinned out, streetlights disappeared, and the road narrowed until it felt forgotten. He didn't talk much, just made small comments about the weather and traffic like we were co-workers. When we pulled up, the house sat alone near a line of trees with no neighboring homes close enough to see us. The place looked empty in a way that felt intentional, not abandoned. No cars, no trash bins, no curtains in the windows. He unlocked the door and gestured for me to go in first. The air inside smelled stale, like dust and old wood, not like a place being actively prepared for sale. I asked where the cleaning supplies were, trying to sound casual. That's when he closed the door behind us and didn't answer. At first, I assumed there was a misunderstanding and tried to keep things light. I said I could leave and come back later if this wasn't a good time. He stepped between me and the door without raising his voice, saying we needed to talk first. The way he blocked the exit felt deliberate, like he had rehearsed the movement. I noticed then how quiet the house was. No hum of appliances, no distant traffic, nothing. My phone had no signal, just a blank bar at the top of the screen. He told me there was no cleaning job and asked questions that had nothing to do with work. Each answer I gave seemed to encourage him to stand closer. I realized then that leaving calmly wasn't an option. Whatever this was, it was already moving in a direction I couldn't afford to follow. I tried to slow everything down by talking, asking questions that didn't matter, pretending this was still a normal conversation. My voice sounded steadier than I felt, like it belonged to someone braver. He started circling the room, explaining how the house used to belong to family, how nobody came out this far anymore. He kept mentioning how people disappeared into routines, and how easy it was for someone to be forgotten. Each sentence landed heavier than the last. I edged toward a hallway, pretending to look for a bathroom, just needing space to think. He noticed immediately and told me not to wander. That was when the fear stopped being abstract and became physical, pressing behind my ribs. I understood that every minute I stayed passive made things worse. The hallway led to empty rooms with bare floors and nothing on the walls, like the house had been stripped on purpose. I noticed the windows were nailed shut from the outside, the wood splintered and uneven. The back door had a metal latch I couldn't open from my side. When I returned to the main room, he was watching me with the patience of someone waiting for a clock to run out. He told me I could sit down, that no one was in a hurry. My phone buzzed with a low battery warning, which felt cruel. I asked to use the bathroom again, this time sounding desperate, and he nodded too quickly. As I walked away, I realized he trusted the house more than he needed to watch me. That was the first opening I saw. In the bathroom, the mirror was cracked down the middle, splitting my face into two uneven versions of myself. I locked the door and scanned the room for anything useful. The window was small but not sealed like the others, just painted shut. I grabbed the towel rack and yanked until the screws tore out of the wall. The noise echoed through the house, followed by his footsteps moving fast. I smashed the window with the metal bar, ignoring the sting of glass on my arm. Cold air rushed in, sharp and real. He started shouting, telling me to stop, telling me I was making a mistake. I didn't stop. I climbed halfway out before he reached the door. The drop outside was awkward but survivable, and I hit the ground hard enough to knock the breath out of me. I didn't look back. My legs moved on instinct, tearing through brush and uneven ground toward the road I remembered. Branches scratched my face and my shoes filled with dirt, but I kept going. When I reached the pavement, a car slowed, the driver staring at me like I was something pulled out of a nightmare. I waved my arms and collapsed onto the shoulder, words tumbling out too fast to make sense. The driver called for help and stayed with me until others arrived. Later, authorities went to the house and found it empty again, like it had already decided to erase itself. I still think about how close I came to being just another person no one noticed missing. The shelter took me back that night without asking many questions, just handed me a blanket and a cup of soup that shook in my hands. I didn't sleep at all. Every time someone walked past my bunk, my body tensed, expecting to see him standing there like he had been waiting. The next morning, a caseworker sat with me in a small office and wrote everything down while I talked. Saying it out loud made it sound unreal, like I was describing a movie I barely remembered watching. She told me I did the right thing, that predators often looked for people who wouldn't be missed right away. That sentence stayed with me longer than anything else. It wasn't meant to hurt, but it did. A few days later, an officer came by to ask more questions. They showed me photos of houses on the outskirts of town, trying to see if any looked familiar. None of them did. The place I remembered didn't seem to exist anymore, at least not on paper. He explained that sometimes people used empty properties temporarily, moving on before anyone caught on. There wasn't much they could do without an exact location. Hearing that made my chest feel hollow. It meant he was still out there, looking for someone else. The officer suggested I avoid day labor spots for a while and stick close to places with cameras and staff. That advice felt small compared to what had happened, but I took it seriously. I eventually found steady work through a church program, cleaning offices during the evening. It wasn't glamorous, but it came with people around and locked doors that opened from the inside. Every time a man spoke too softly or stood too close, my body reacted before my mind did. I learned how to trust that reaction without letting it control me. I started saving again, slow and careful. I also started talking to other women at the shelter, sharing what happened without details that could scare them away from hope. I told them to listen to the moments that felt wrong even if nothing obvious was happening. Those conversations mattered more than I expected. Posting this now isn't about closure so much as clarity. That day taught me how thin the line is between survival and disappearance, especially when you're already on the margins. I don't know what his plan was or how far it might have gone, and maybe that's for the best. What I do know is that leaving when I did changed everything. I'm in a small apartment now, nothing special, but the door locks and the windows open freely. Some nights I still dream about that house and wake up counting exits. Other nights I sleep through until morning, and that feels like a victory I earned the hard way. At the time, life had narrowed down to whatever fit inside my backpack and whatever kindness the night decided to offer. Sleeping came in fragments, usually on benches or behind closed storefronts, and most days blurred together in a quiet fight to stay clean enough not to draw attention. That evening had been colder than usual, the kind that creeps through thin fabric and settles into your bones. A gas station on the edge of town glowed like a small island of safety, fluorescent lights humming and buzzing insects trapped against the glass. I went in because I needed water and a place to rinse my face. Nothing more ambitious than that. My reflection in the restroom mirror barely looked like someone with a past, just a man with tired eyes and cracked lips. The sink sputtered before giving me lukewarm water, and even that felt like a gift. For a few minutes, the world outside stopped pressing in. The restroom smelled like disinfectant layered over something older and sour, the kind of smell that never fully leaves. I leaned against the wall, letting the quiet wrap around me, counting my breaths until the ache in my feet eased. There was no clock inside, just the faint music from the store speakers bleeding through the walls. At some point, the music stopped, replaced by the sharp clatter of metal somewhere near the front. A heavy thud hit the door, followed by another, louder this time, rattling the handle. Someone yelled something muffled, words lost through steel and echo. I pulled the handle instinctively and felt the resistance immediately. The lock had shifted, solid and final, like a decision already made. Panic didn't arrive all at once. It trickled in, slow and humiliating. I knocked back, trying to keep my voice steady as I called out that someone was inside. The pounding answered me again, quicker, then stopped altogether. Silence settled in so deeply I could hear my own breathing bouncing off the tile. The light stayed on, but the building felt hollow, emptied of people and intent. No phone sat in my pocket, no bottle of water on the sink, nothing that tied me to anyone outside that room. Time stretched in strange ways, minutes swelling into something heavier. Hunger gave way to thirst, and thirst became the only thing I could think about. Every sound from the street felt distant, like it belonged to another version of the world. Hours passed with nothing but the hum of the lights and my own thoughts turning sharp. Sitting on the floor, I realized how invisible I had become, how easy it was for a place to lock up and forget someone like me existed. If something had happened in there, there wouldn't have been a name called out or a number dialed. The door didn't care who leaned against it or how long they stayed quiet. That understanding hit harder than the locked handle or the dry mouth ever could. When the morning finally came and the door opened, the clerk looked startled, then embarrassed, then relieved all at once. I stepped back into daylight, changed in a way that's hard to explain. Since then, I've never stopped thinking about how close disappearing really is, and how no one would have known if I had. The moment the door opened, light flooded in like it had weight, and I had to shield my eyes. The clerk kept apologizing, saying the lock must have caught by mistake, saying they never checked the restroom before closing. I nodded because that was easier than explaining anything. My legs felt weak standing up, pins and needles shooting through my feet as if they didn't belong to me anymore. I asked for water and drank it too fast, spilling some down my chin, not caring how it looked. People stared for a second and then went back to their own routines, coffee cups and lottery tickets, morning already swallowing the night. No one asked how long I'd been in there. No one asked if I was okay. I stepped outside and sat on the curb, letting the cold concrete ground me. Cars came and went, engines starting, doors slamming, the normal rhythm of a day beginning. From the outside, the place looked harmless. Just another gas station people forget the moment they pull away. I kept thinking about the lock, how a small turn of metal had erased me from the building without anyone noticing. If I hadn't knocked, if the clerk hadn't opened up when they did, the story could have gone very differently. The thought stayed lodged in my chest, heavy and uncomfortable. I watched the sky lighten and wondered how many times this kind of thing happens without an ending. Later that day, I tried to go about things like normal, but everything felt sharper. Thirst came back quickly, my throat reminding me how fragile the body really is. Every closed door suddenly felt like a risk instead of shelter. I replayed the sounds in my head, the pounding, the sudden quiet, the way the air felt stale after hours with no movement. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was clarity. Being homeless doesn't just mean lacking a place to sleep. It means existing on the edge of other people's attention. The moment that attention slips, you're alone with whatever happens next. That night, I didn't go looking for enclosed spaces. I stayed where I could see the sky, where doors couldn't decide my fate. The experience didn't turn me into a different person overnight, but it stripped something away. I understood how easily I could vanish inside a locked room, a stairwell, a forgotten corner of a building. Since then, I pay attention to exits, to sounds, to the simple fact of being seen. The world didn't change after that day, but I did. And even now, when I pass a gas station late at night, I remember how close I came to becoming a story no one ever told. In the days that followed, the memory kept resurfacing at strange moments. Washing my hands at a public sink made my chest tighten. Hearing a lock click somewhere nearby pulled my attention instantly. I caught myself studying doors, hinges, the way handles sat in their frames, like they were clues to something dangerous. It wasn't paranoia so much as awareness sharpened by experience. People walked past me every day, close enough that I could smell their laundry soap or their coffee, yet none of them knew how close I'd come to being sealed away overnight. I realized how thin the line was between being part of the world and being forgotten inside it. I eventually told another guy on the street about what happened, someone who'd been out there longer than me. He listened quietly, nodding, not surprised at all. He said something that stuck with me, that buildings don't see people, only schedules. Closing time doesn't care who's still inside. That idea haunted me more than the locked door ever did. Systems run smoothly because they aren't built to notice individuals like us. If you fall outside the expected flow, you're just an error that goes unreported. Standing there, I understood that the scariest part wasn't the fear or the thirst, but how normal the situation was. I started making small changes after that. I avoided going anywhere without at least knowing how many exits there were. If I went into a restroom, I paid attention to sounds, footsteps, keys jangling. I asked clerks questions I never would have asked before, just to make sure someone had seen me. It felt awkward, sometimes embarrassing, but staying invisible suddenly felt far worse. I didn't want my existence to depend on whether someone remembered to check a door. Those hours trapped inside that room rewired how I moved through the world. Cautious but alert. Nothing dramatic came out of it in the end. No report, no apology letter. no consequence beyond my own memory. Life went on the same way it always does for people like me, one day bleeding into the next. But I carry that night with me as proof of how close disappearing really is. If I hadn't spoken up, if timing had been slightly different, there wouldn't have been a story to post here at all. I'm sharing this because it happened, because it could happen again, and because some people only exist as long as someone remembers they're there. During the winter I'm talking about, my life had shrunk down to a backpack, a prepaid phone, and whatever space I could claim without being noticed. I wasn't living on the street exactly, not in the way people imagine, but I wasn't stable either. I worked odd hours cleaning offices after they closed, paid in cash, and slept wherever I could stay dry and unseen. That storage facility became my compromise with reality. Renting a small unit felt like a loophole, something almost clever, a place with cameras, fences, and rules that kept most people away at night. I told myself it was temporary, just until I saved enough for a room somewhere. That night started like any other, quiet, routine, almost boring in a way that made me relax more than I should have. The unit I used was narrow and smelled like dust and old cardboard, with a concrete floor that held the cold no matter how many layers I wore. I arranged my things with military precision so nothing scraped or rattled if I shifted my weight. The metal door, when lowered just enough, left a slit of air that felt like breathing through clenched teeth. I always waited until the facility went dark before settling in, listening for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional clank of someone leaving late. That evening, the silence felt heavier, like the building itself was holding its breath. I remember thinking it might rain, the way the air pressed against my ears. Sometime after I lay down, the stillness broke in a way that didn't belong. Footsteps echoed down the row, slow and deliberate, not the hurried pace of someone grabbing boxes before closing. Each step had weight to it, the sound bouncing off the metal doors in uneven rhythm. Then came the unmistakable grind of a lock being turned and a unit door lifting nearby. I counted the seconds between movements without meaning to, my mind cataloging every sound like it was evidence. Whoever it was didn't rush, didn't fumble, didn't curse under their breath. That scared me more than anything else could have. Without warning, the overhead light snapped on, flooding the corridor with harsh white glare that seeped through the crack under my door. My heart hammered so hard I was sure it had a sound of its own. Shadows moved across the concrete as someone walked past, stopping occasionally, testing locks one by one. I could hear the faint click of metal and the soft scrape of fingers along door handles. My thoughts split in two directions at once. Stay perfectly still and hope I blended into the building, or take the risk of slipping out while the noise masked me. Every instinct argued with the other, and the space around me felt suddenly too small to breathe. I pressed myself against the back wall, pulling my jacket tighter, trying to control the noise of my breathing without thinking about it too much. The footsteps stopped right outside my unit, close enough that I could see the shadow of shoes through the gap. There was a pause that stretched longer than it should have, followed by the soft rattle of my lock being tested. It didn't open, but the sound of it being touched made my chest ache. Whoever was out there leaned close enough that I caught the faint smell of oil and something sharp, almost medicinal. I realized then how thin the metal door really was, how little separated me from being discovered. The person moved on, checking the next unit, then the next, following a pattern that felt methodical instead of random. I shifted my weight carefully, inch by inch, making sure nothing brushed the floor. Sweat gathered at the base of my neck despite the cold, and my legs tingled from staying too still. Through the crack, I could see flashes of movement as the figure passed under each light. The way they stopped, listened, and then continued told me this wasn't casual. This was someone making sure everything was exactly how they expected it to be. A low voice carried down the row, not loud enough to make out words, but close enough to know someone else might be on the phone or using a radio. That changed everything. One person was terrifying, but the idea of more than one made the air feel heavier. I thought about the exit at the far end, about how far it was, about how loud the gravel sounded under shoes. Staying hidden meant trusting that my presence hadn't already been noticed. Leaving meant stepping into the open under full light, gambling that speed would beat attention. When the footsteps moved farther away, I slowly lifted the door another inch, just enough to see the corridor clearly. The lights hummed overhead, and at the far end, a figure stood near the office, clipboard in hand, checking something against a list. Another person emerged from between units, nodding as they passed each other. That was the moment I decided. I waited until both of them turned away, then slipped out, keeping low, closing the door as softly as possible. Every step toward the exit felt like it echoed, but no one called out. I didn't stop moving until I was beyond the fence, lungs burning, hands numb, carrying everything I owned on my back. I didn't go far at first, just enough to put distance between me and that building. I sat behind a row of dumpsters across the road, knees pulled in, watching the facility from the shadows. The light stayed on longer than usual, and I saw one of them walk the perimeter fence with a flashlight, sweeping the beam along the ground and the gate. It hit the spot where I'd slipped through not long before, paused there, then moved on. That pause told me everything I needed to know. If I had stayed inside, if I'd hesitated even a little longer, I don't think I would have walked out on my own. I waited until the lights finally shut off again before moving. My hands were stiff, and my shoulders ached from tension more than from the cold. I took a longer route away from the area, sticking to side streets, listening for engines slowing down or footsteps changing pace behind me. Every sound felt amplified, like my body was still trapped in that narrow unit. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just kept walking, stopping only when my legs threatened to give out, replaying the sequence of sounds in my head over and over. The next day, I went back during regular hours, trying to look like a normal customer with a reason to be there. I packed my things fast, avoiding eye contact, half expecting someone to stop me or ask questions. No one did. The office clerk barely glanced up. That normalcy was unsettling in its own way. I dropped the key in the slot, walked out, and didn't look back. I didn't argue with myself about it or tell myself I was overreacting. I knew better after what I'd heard and seen. I never slept in another storage unit again. I found a different arrangement not long after, one that didn't rely on being invisible. Even now, when I hear metal doors rolling up or locks clicking into place, my body reacts before my mind does. I don't know who those people were or what would have happened if I'd stayed hidden until they reached my door. What I do know is that trusting that place to keep me safe almost cost me the only thing I had left, the ability to walk away,